Chapter 9. Cliff. The second I arrived home from Rome, I was arrested for Kenton's murder. Her father, Ben Motorized, had many friends in the Justice Department, and he had strong-armed them into ignoring juvenile laws and charging me as an adult at age 16 with first-degree murder. My mother and Penelope came to see me in jail. Penelope burst into tears the moment she laid eyes on me.
"George, poor thing! I'll promise I'll get you out of here, George! Oh, George!"
She was in such a state it rather rattled me. "But I'm fine, Penelope. Calm down. We can't have you losing control of your emotions now." I did not need a locked room clown showing up here. Both of them seemed rather surprised I wasn't more upset.
"Eh?"
Penelope said dubiously.
"This doesn't bother you?"
"I've grown up a lot, you know. I gotta keep it together."
"Huh."
My mother seemed equally concerned, but she said,
"Well, I'm glad to hear it, George. Still, we'll do everything we can to get you home soon. Don't you worry."
Don't worry about me. I'm actually pretty comfortable here."
"You really do seem like you're okay."
Still not quite believing it, Mother and Penelope went on their way, but on the way back to my solitary cell, they were keeping me separated from the adult criminals. It was all I could do to stop myself from skipping. The guards hated it when I did that, so I forced myself to walk. I suppose this was what they meant by happy feet. I wanted to get back to my cell, the tiny cell at the very back, where Lisa was. As we reached the cell, the guard went bzz and fell asleep on his feet. She'd paralysed the thought centres of his brain, and he fell back to his normal routine, doing only things he didn't have to think about. Put the suspect in the cell, turn the key, just like he did every day. His eyes saw Lisa and saw the state of our cell. We even had a fridge, but his mind failed to comprehend it. My mind remained unaffected because Lisa had given me socks that blocked the hamon she was sending rippling through the floor. They were made from special thread from the Smyrtopologian beetle, I think. Anyway, this weird bug's thread disperses hamon.
"Welcome back, George."
"Good to be back."
"Mama Eleanor looked so worried at first. Thank goodness you were able to reassure her."
"You were watching?"
I thought I might have to say I was with you if she looked too upset."
If Mother found out about this, she might very well say that jail was no place for a young lady and forbid her from staying."
"But reassure her you did."
Lisa chuckled.
"So I didn't say anything. Mama Eleanor and Old Man Speedwagon will take care of things, and the Hamon warriors are helping too. I'm sure you'll be free in no time."
I didn't really want to leave. With Lisa being nice enough to bring me food and snacks and clean the place and teaching me things, this place was paradise. I didn't have to go to school either, but I knew better than to tell her that. Since Lisa had been with me almost since the moment I was arrested, I'd escaped all anxiety and fear. I knew I could rely on her utterly and completely. Watching her walk right into the jail with all the guards going buzz, 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 I completely forgot to be depressed.
"I'll get yelled at for using hamon like this."
She laughed. She was the best. She left at night, though.
"It wouldn't be appropriate,"
she said. "I wouldn't do anything." So alone at night I thought about Kenton Motorized, the girl who got me to dream, like a fairy riding on the back of a bird, always smiling, prone to startling me with her sharp tongue, but she never once lied or hid her feelings. She was fun to be around. But now she was dead. On the morning of my 6th day in jail, Stephen came to see me. I thought. Maybe he thought I was the killer. I was scared to see him, but I wanted to see him. He'd lost his sister and I wanted to give him my condolences. Maybe I wouldn't be able to do anything, maybe the words wouldn't formed, but I should at least show myself, I thought. Kenton had been brutally stabbed 23 times in the gut and chest and face with a knife from my house, and my plane had been with her. Even if it wasn't actually my fault, I felt as if there should have been something I could have done to stop her from dying. But I was scared. Scared to face my friend's death head on, and scared to face her brother after his sister was murdered.
"Go, George. Be with your friend the way I'm here with you."
Lisa promised to watch the visiting room from close by, so I gathered my nerve and went to see Stephen. Stephen looked beside himself, and had lost so much weight I barely recognised him. I was almost at a loss for words, but I managed to say, "Kenton, it's too sad, too horrible. I don't know what to say. The police suspect me, but obviously I didn't do it."
I believe you, Stephen said. You would never kill Kenton. But I came to apologize. My father is convinced you did it, and is hell-bent on taking all his rage out on you. I keep telling him you would never do something like that, but he needs to avenge her, and won't hear a word of it.
That was depressing, but I didn't let it show. That's okay. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about anything else. Just mourn Kenton. I'm praying for you every night, praying that she can find peace in heaven.
Thank you. But Kenton was cut to pieces. I can't picture heaven or hell right now. I just don't understand why a girl like her would get murdered.
I had no answer.
I hope we can fly together someday, Stephen said. I saw your plane. It was balanced well. You were almost ready to fly it.
Ah, I thought about the old motorizing 5, reborn as the Star Shooter. If my weight was around 100 grams, I'd have been able to fly it. It had made for a good kite. My plane hadn't just been left lying at the cliff where Kenton had been murdered. It had been tied to a rope and flown, with Kenton's body and a rock as anchors. There was a strong wind off the sea and heavy rainfall weighing the plane down, but it had flown high anyway. That was why they'd found Kenton's body so quickly. Stephen had seen the kite, and it led him to the horrible discovery of his sister's remains. I couldn't imagine how that must have felt. Doesn't seem like they're going to let me fly, I said.
Don't let yourself think like that, George,
Stephen said, smiling.
If the two of us abandon planes, it'll feel like there's no proof Kenton even existed.
I remembered that at night, and cried in my cell. Kenton loved planes. She loved flying. She was good at it and never more beautiful. Even now I wasn't sure if I really liked planes, or had just been entranced by the sight of her flying off that cliff. Despite my mother's best efforts, I remained in jail, but it seemed like the police were having trouble building a case against me. To take the case to trial, they needed to get all their facts in order, but there were too many mysteries about Kenton's death. First, nobody could figure out a timeline for my actions that allowed for the murder. After speaking to Darlington at the motorised home, Faraday had led me to another room, and then I'd called from Rome 2 hours later. The only time unaccounted for was that 2 hours, and getting from Westwood, England to Rome, Italy, in 2 hours was clearly impossible. It was a 4-day trip by rail or by sea, and even if we took the maximum flight distance of American planes and placed that end to end, it'd still take 2 days. When the police questioned this, I answered, Faraday took me to see a friend who should be dead, and when I took his hand I found myself in total darkness. I figured out I was in a cave and climbed out of it, and found myself in an underground ruin in Rome. That was mostly true, so I could explain it comfortably, even though the police were trained to see through lies. I left Lisa out of it, and named a different underground ruin she'd suggested instead of the temple with the treasure room in it. But that underground ruin hadn't yet been officially discovered, so when the Italian police went to check it out, it became a huge deal, and if I hadn't gotten lost in there, they'd never have known the ruin was even there, so it seemed like I was going to get away with lying about that part. In fact, if proven innocent, there was talk of the Italian government giving me an award. I turned it down already, though. Lisa and the other Hamon masters apparently knew everything that lay on the ground. I could tell the police had no idea what to make of my nonsensical statement. They clearly couldn't write that down in their reports as is. They had Faraday's testimony and proof from Rome, so despite what I was saying, they couldn't doubt the fact of it. They had me undergo a psychological evaluation, but whatever the result of it was, they still had to write a detailed account of how I could have killed Kenton motorised in Westwood, England, before travelling to Italy. And that was hardly the end of the mess they had to make sense of. I had no motive to kill Kenton. At all. She was one of the few friends I had in Italy. She and her brother were the only friends I had. I'd liked her cheery disposition, the open way she spoke, and she taught me everything I knew about planes. This was the truth. But in their report, they said I was in love with Kenton, had said I'd show her my plane to get her alone and ask her out, and had killed her when she turned me down. I'd brought the knife with me, planning to threaten her with it, and had tied the plane to her body and flown it to make her grave. That isn't true, I said, over and over and over again, and learned it was useless to say anything to someone intent on bending the truth, or outright lying to make things fit their needs. Based purely on the estimated time of Kenton's death, it should have been difficult to believe I killed her. I arrived at the house at 3:30, and Faraday led me to the other room around 4. But Stephen had just arrived home when he saw the kite flying above the cliffs from the gate of the manor, around 4:10. It was a 25-minute trip by wagon from the motorised manor to the scene of the crime. 2 hours walking, and even if one were to run the whole way, it was a steady incline, so it'd take at least an hour. Kenton had been seen leaving school with an umbrella about 3:30, and if she'd headed straight for the cliffs, it would have taken her 30 minutes. When her body was found, Stephen had seen the kite flying in the rain from his house, and afraid something had happened, had run his horse straight to the cliffs. According to his testimony, Kenton's body had still been warm, so the murderer must have killed Kenton on her way home, tied her body to my star shooter and let it fly. All in the 10-minute period between 4 o'clock and 4:10. Just transporting the plane was a huge challenge. I'd been bringing star shooter back from the dead in my tent, and it was fully assembled. Normally, transporting it would have meant taking it apart, carrying it to the cliffs, and then putting it together again. But from what Stephen had seen, there weren't any new marks made on the body, so it would have been impossible for anyone without my knowledge of the plane's construction to take it apart and put it back together again. After all, I'd designed and built it myself. It was a mess of cobbled-together bits and oddball parts, which meant the killer must have transported it to the scene of the crime intact. It was a glider with a 10-minute wingspan. The cliffs were 5 kilometres from where the plane was kept, and the town centre was right in the middle, so the killer would have had to take the long way round to avoid being seen. Could they have flown it as a kite while moving it? If anyone saw a rope leading into the sky, they'd wonder what was on the end of it, and a weight of one person wouldn't have been enough to control Star Shooter once the wind caught it. The fastest way to get it there would be to climb aboard and fly it, and the winds were strong enough that the winds passing through the tent had it almost had a hover. But like Stephen said, the balance wasn't yet right, and it was impossible for it to carry anyone. Yet in the report, that was how I'd got the plane to the cliffs. I'd left school, come home, picked up a knife, flown Star Shooter to the manor, spoken to Darlington, snuck out of the house unseen, and then flown the plane to the cliffs. Kenton was waiting for me there, and when she rejected me, I stabbed her to death. I denied everything, but the report was finished and I was allowed to return home. I'd rather have stayed in jail, but I couldn't make Lisa dote on me forever, so I reluctantly went home. The Westwood jail guards were starting to have fits brought on by overexposure to Lisa's hamon anyway. Their eyes would roll back in their heads and they stopped moving entirely, as if lost in a daydream. Lisa had a fiery temper, so I privately suspected she'd used hamon that was a bit too strong. Lisa accompanied me from the cell to the front door, without anyone noticing. But once we reached the door, she said, "Okay, I'd better be off then." "Eh? You aren't coming home with me?" "I've got work for Straits. I've been playing hooky." "What? I'll miss you." "Don't do that, George. You've got to find the strength within you. They're going to take you to trial. It's only going to get worse from here." "I knew that, but that's depressing." "Come on, George. Your friend was murdered and they think you did it. Depressing's hardly strong enough, is it?" "Good point." "Yeah, I had to agree. I'd lost Kenton and was probably losing Stephen as well." "That's true. And depending on how this trial went, I could well lose everything that mattered to me. I had to fight this." "Thank you for everything, Lisa." She peered intently into my eyes. "I need to be stronger," I said. "I need to be strong enough to do this on my own." "You don't need to be strong," Lisa said. "You just need to be a grown man." "Then I'll aim for that, and be stronger that way." Don't think you need to do this on your own, George. I'll come to help you again." "But if I'm not strong like you..." "George, it's not like I can do everything on my own. I'm not strong at all. You're helping me just as much as I'm helping you." "Eh?" My mind was filled with warm, fuzzy memories of our time together in jail, so I genuinely didn't know what she was talking about. "When I was underground in Rome and terrified? You came to save me, George. You helped me more than you can know. You might have even saved my life. There was that thing in the dark, remember? You noticed it too, right, George?" "The gorilla spider?" "Yeah, I did." "I still have no idea what that thing was, but I know it was after me. Just as it was about to attack me, you showed up and protected me, George." "I did. Yeah, but it's not like I was brave or anything." "My point is, George, finding people you can rely on gives you strength. Whether or not they can actually be relied upon is beside the question." I went home. Mother and Penelope welcomed me, we ate dinner, and I went to my room. At last I could think. Not about Kenton, but about Sukumajuku. When I'd seen him floating just off the ground in the motorized manner, it was definitely Sukumajuku, alive, but not in any way normal. That meant Sukumajuku didn't die on the boat. Instead, he time-travelled to Japan 107 years into the future. I thought this was a good thing. Japan was at war with Russia, and while the Japanese forces were on the offensive, Russia's Baltic fleet would probably annihilate them soon. Once they'd turned the tables and Japan had surrendered, and Korea was securely under Russian control, they'd clearly attempt to conquer Japan as well, which might have spelled trouble for Sukumajuku. He was once again my only friend, so I was glad to hear he was in a world without war, and with another me. Was that Jorge Joestar descended from me? Then why was he in Japan? Would the Joestars move to Japan someday? How would something like that happen? Did something happen in England? Would England go to war with Russia? Would they annex Japan as a protectorate? I didn't know anything about war. Everything I knew about time travel came from the novel by H.G. Wells. I couldn't imagine what the world 107 years in the future was like. But at least I knew one thing for sure. Sukumajuku hadn't drowned to death. The thought made me want to go look for him, made me feel like I had to find out what had happened to him, as his former partner. But what could I do? The boat Sukumajuku was on sank off the coast of Florida. I couldn't travel to America to look into it, not now that I'd been charged with first-degree murder. If I left the country, they'd think I was running for it. And would there even be any evidence of time travel? Even if there was, would I be able to recognise it? Even if there was some clear and amazing proof that time travel had happened here, what could I do with that? Did I really think I could chase after Sukumajuku to the world 107 years in the future? Sukumajuku was a genuinely special person. I was normal. There were many things I couldn't do, and I was still only 16, and I had to deal with these murder charges first. He'd said he would probably meet me again someday. I just have to wait for that. What was it he'd said exactly? Something about his name? He'd said something about the kanji. I remembered the Japanese dictionary he'd given me. I looked it up, but there wasn't any special meaning. It just meant 9 and 10. I'd been charged, but since I was pleading innocent, we had to have a jury trial. In the opening statements, the prosecutor spouted nonsense, and a supposedly amazing lawyer Mother hired made a counter-argument to the jury, dismantling the prosecutor's theories. Witnesses were called, questioned, cross-examined, and questioned again, and it seemed to be taking a while. Since I couldn't go to school while the trial was going on, I had to study at home, so once again Penelope became my tutor. She explained everything very well, so my studies went quickly, and I had more free time. I was bored and I didn't feel like mucking around with planes, but if I went into town I'd run into classmates or maybe even members of the motorized family. What was happening to me was so freaky I couldn't concentrate on reading. I'd liked messing around with planes and I had a lot of tools lying around, so I was wondering what else could keep my hands busy when Mother came home and stepped out of the automobile she was using at work, and I found my new toy. Motorcars! Vroom vroom! I immediately asked to get a license. However, you couldn't get a driver's license until you were 17. The world definitely seemed to think cars were for grown-ups, but my mother was never one to care about such things, and let me do as I pleased. I got the man who drove her to work and back to teach me how to drive, and I had the hang of it in no time. They were much easier to control than airplanes. They were built to be easy to drive. I bought a car, a Rover 8. A two-seater that I immediately took apart and considered trying to customise, but all the parts were handmade and replacements weren't easily available, and unlike what I'd been messing around with planes with Stephen Motorise, I didn't have a teacher, and was doing everything by myself, so I took a few parts off and looked, and then put them back and looked, trying to figure out how engines worked, but of course it broke. I was never actually that good at this stuff, no reason I would be. So I took it to an automotive garage in London, and there I met a college student named John Moore-Babazon. One glance at John told you he was someone. He wore an expensive suit poorly and stumped around the garage floor, scowling at every car like a particularly bold thief. But as I watched, he suddenly took the engine out of one car and started switching the wheels on another, doing whatever he liked without any of the other mechanics saying anything. So I asked, and it turned out he actually owned all 7 cars in the place, and I thought, wow, even the aristocrats don't have that many. How rich is this dude? Apparently he was private mechanic to a man named Charles Rolls, who owned an automotive company. So 4 of the 7 cars in here he owned for work-related research, and the remaining 3 were test designs given to him by his boss, and nobody but him was allowed to touch any of them. Gosh, that sounded fun. When I heard he was still a student, I knew there were incredible people in this world. I stood watching him poke at this and that, walking from car to car as the whim or idea struck him, taking pieces out, changing them, taking things apart, putting them back together. I was having so much fun watching him, I forgot my original plan to learn something about how cars actually work, and just watched in sheer admiration of his handiwork. A shockwave was running slowly through me. It seemed to my core much like my first meeting with Kenton Motorized. But not just that. It also reminded me of when I first met Tsukumajuku, and I was beginning to get the hazy idea I was on the verge of another life change. So when John noticed me and spoke, I just thought it was happening again. And then he yelled, "Quit staring at my ass, motherfucker!" Eh? What did he just say? I wasn't fucking looking. Who the fuck is this brat? Who you calling brat? You're just sponging off your rich friend. I earned that shit with my own 2 hands. I bet your parents just bought you that car, didn't they? Shitbird. Clang. He'd thrown a wrench at my Rover 8, so I totally lost it. What the fuck are you doing? I yelled, and considered fucking up his cars. But it seemed like a waste, so I didn't, and instead shoved John out of the way and opened up the Rover 8's engine and started fixing the broken part, and was so mad I could see how to fix the part I couldn't figure out how to fix early. So I fixed it myself and then banged the dent John's wrench had made out from the inside until you couldn't tell it had ever been there. Jumped into the driver's seat, looked over at John, who was staring at me with his mouth opened, and yelled, "I'm gonna run you over, so stand still." Bang! Brrr, the engine started up and I hit the accelerator and really tried to run him over and wound up chasing after John, but he was all like, "Fuck that," and ran out of the shop, jumped into a working eighth car he had parked out front and drove away, and we ended up in a car chase through the industrial district. But it wasn't a contest at all. John's car was twice as fast as mine. It just went shoop shoop away from me and ran circles around me, and he shouted insults as my eyes filled with tears. Lots of childish shit like sticking his tongue out in na 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 boo boo, and I got even more pissed off, but I couldn't catch him. John laughed his ass off. "Let's play tag all through London," he yelled, and in a corner of my mind I thought, shit, if I get arrested he'll fuck up the trial, but I couldn't stop myself. "Fuck you! Just die!" And we shot out of the factory, startling horses and pedestrians, and I followed as he dodged everything perfectly and was impressed despite myself. By the time the mounted police started chasing us, I was laughing. Even though it'd be really bad if they caught me, I was having fun. I'd been bullied my whole life and had never been much of a fighter, and while I'd let it bottle up inside me until I exploded and took a swing at someone a few times, John had pulled the rage out of me so easily the curses just spilled off my tongue. It felt amazing. Liberating. To think I could talk like this, that I could trade blows instead of snapping. Later, John and I went back to the garage, and the road mechanic shook their head at us, but soon we were all laughing and John and I were friends. It wasn't the way I'd imagined, but my life had indeed changed again. John was a member of the Royal Automobile Club, and its star. To me, he was a magician. I mean, everything he turned his hands to not only got fixed, it worked better than it had before. If he sat in the driver's seat, that car would run and turn like never before. If he drove off in it and came back, when he stepped out of it, the entire vehicle would look polished to a new level of beauty. When he raced, he was less interested in winning than in enjoying himself to the fullest. The results were too inconsistent for gamblers, but as a spectator his performance was full of gasp-inspiring moves and previously unheard-of strategic manoeuvres. The other drivers considered him one of the best. As the only one of his friends younger than him, John quite liked me, but that often got me in trouble. John was very good at making fun of people, and every time I saw him he'd come after me so tenaciously I'd wind up fighting back tears. But I put up with it, and kept chasing after him, and my own race results gradually improved, and people started to notice me. But the more people knew me, the more they knew about him. Most people avoided me after finding out I was on trial for murder. "Who cares if you killed her or not?" John said. No, it matters," I said, but I knew what he meant. The truth didn't change our relationship. I was almost touched by this, but then he added, "Besides, if war starts, most men will wind up killers, but we'll go on living as if that's normal." What was he talking about? "Then just don't go to war," I said. John laughed. "You're a fool, George. The next war's going to be way bigger than ever before. Battlefields, soldiers and weapons." I didn't know what he meant, but he was right. I never really had a knack for politics or international intrigue. When Japan utterly destroyed the Baltic fleet, sinking down near every ship in it and emerging victorious over Russia, I thought, damn, Japan. but I just wasn't that interested in Japan as long as Sukumajuku wasn't there. I was sick to death of trials. I mean, the police had a bullshit report, and the trial was based on that bullshit, and nobody involved believed a word of it, so there was no way they'd ever be able to convince anyone to believe a word of it. Not once had they managed to get all 12 jurors to buy into the bullshit, so they kept returning hung juries and starting over, and the third time they finally got a not guilty verdict, and before I could even breathe a sigh of relief, the Attorney General declared there were grounds that overturned the not guilty verdict, and the trial continued in the appellate court. And so I turned 17 and 18, still under suspicion, graduated Hugh Hudson High without ever going back, and refused to go to college despite Mother and Penelope's pleas. After all, not one good thing had ever happened to me in school. And I was finally starting to give John a run for his money in RAC races, and automobile technology was advancing like you wouldn't believe. And a year before, John's boss, Rolls, had put out the Silver Ghost, which could do 80 kilometers per hour without any noise, and a guy named Ford in America had started mass-producing his T-Series. This was the age of cars, baby, and here I was, right at the side of the centre of the heart of that fire, and John went off to a circuit race in the Ardennes in Belgium and hopped in a Minerva and drove 600 kilometres in 6 hours, 14 minutes and 5 seconds and won. Trapped back in England, I got a call from John afterwards. "Hey, we're doing planes next." "Huh?" John and John's boss, Charles Rolls, were basically all about adventure. Rolls had decided his company was going to start making airplane engines, and John was super into it too. I'd mentioned playing around with airplanes before Kenton's murder, and John said, "Maybe you're better at airplanes than you are cars," which irritated the shit out of me, but I ended up getting back into planes too, and that made me want to talk to Stephen Motorise again. I couldn't exactly just go ring the doorbell at the Motorise Manor, but Stephen had never really come to school that much and didn't seem to have any friends to speak of, and since I stopped going to school entirely I wouldn't have known who to ask anyway, so for lack of any other options I asked my mother, who said, "He left home and is working in France somewhere." She didn't seem to know anything more. I could have looked into it further, but if he was out of country I couldn't exactly go see him, and this wasn't really the sort of thing you talked about over the phone. So I was starting to give up, when Penelope asked, "What do you want with Stephen Motorise?" She sounded weirdly pissed. John and everyone has started to get into planes now," I said. "Huh? Planes? George, don't do that. I can't see anything good coming from planes." But John's already made up his mind. "Jeez, John, you let your friends control every action you take. Every time you meet someone, you stop thinking about anything else. It's creepy." "Oh dear. Creepy, huh? Is it?" I could kind of see how it might be. I'd done the same thing with Sukumajuku. I was pretty bad at making friends, so I wound up being super devoted to the ones I did make. "I mean, I guess you did that with me too. But I worry, you know," Penelope said, and now I was a little worried too, and then a couple of days later Darlington Motorise came to the Joestar mansion. I hadn't seen her since the day her sister Kenton was killed. The last 2 years had aged Darlington out of her old sweet and gentle disposition. This had been replaced with an intimidating formidability. "Hello. I apologise for the sudden visit," she said politely. Sure. It's been a while," I said, at a loss for words. "We need to talk. Do you have a minute?" "Yeah, I guess. Should we step outside?" It was the weekend, and Penelope was here. If the two of them saw each other, it would lead to trouble, I thought. "Let's," Darlington agreed. "It's high time the two of us spoke. We haven't even seen each other all this time." We stepped into the beech woods out back, but Darlington didn't actually say anything. Finally, I broke the silence. "I know it's a bit late now, but I was very sad to hear about Kenton." Darlington's expression didn't change. She didn't respond at all. She just kept walking, so I said nothing else. We walked away through the dappled light of the woods. At last Darlington said, "You remember William Cardinal?" "Sorry, who?" "My boyfriend." "Oh, the athlete who was very smart but wanted to be a writer." Darlington seemed surprised I'd remembered all that, but she was no more surprised than I was. "Quite the memory you have there," she said. "Guess it came as a shock," I said, intending it to cover the awkwardness, but it felt uncomfortably close to the truth. "To you," Darlington said. I didn't blame her. "Why?" "Like I said then, it felt like he was suddenly attacking me. I was scared." "Sorry,
I was just a confused little girl back then. Still am.
She seemed to have grown up a lot to me. No, I had no reason to react like I did either. Anyone has the right to their opinion of any novel, or any person.
But it was bad form on my part to tell you something mean someone said about you.
I didn't disagree with that. It doesn't matter now. I never imagined I'd speak to you again, even without what happened to Kenton. But I'm glad to see you. Thanks for coming. So, what about Mr. Cardinal?
He's saying he's going to enlist before becoming a doctor. Wants to be a commissioned officer. He's good at motivating people. He might be a better commander than a doctor.
Huh. No more novels?
He hasn't spoken about that lately.
But you're still seeing him?
I am.
Oh.
That disappointed look on your face suggests I've given you the impression he isn't a good man.
Well, maybe.
So I don't want this to seem like another sudden attack, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. Do you mind?
Go ahead.
William's hardly a perfect man. He can be shallow and boring and tactless, but I think he's far better than you.
I mean, I'm not going to argue he's not a better or more normal person than I am, but...
Listen, you have a way of getting all the girls around you to look at you.
What do you mean?
Don't deny it.
I really don't know what you mean.
Then think about it. That's what I wanted to point out. For 2 years now.
Eh? Sorry.
You're too quick to apologise. You don't even understand what I'm talking about.
No.
What's worst about you is that you don't even realise what you're doing, that you aren't actually looking for romance with any of the girls you lead on. You've already got someone for that. You always have.
Eh? Oh. I knew what that meant. It meant I was pathetic. We walked through the woods in silence a while. Then we went back to the house, and Penelope's voice came down from the stairs over the entrance hall like thunder.
What is that woman doing here? Hello, Mr. Narancia,
Darlington said calmly. They clearly already knew each other.
Your family is trying to frame George for murder. How dare you come here? That's what I came to talk about. Even if you drop the charges now, it won't get George these 2 years back.
Eh? I thought. I guess that was also a possibility. But before the thought could cheer me up, Darlington shook her head.
I'm afraid there's no chance of that happening. Truth is, the reason I came here is because my father's found new evidence that seems it will dislodge the trial from this quagmire. George, I think you'd better look into the possibility of a plea bargain. Unofficially, of course.
A plea bargain? What?
Ha!
Penelope roared. I could hear a faint rustle, as if the furniture on the porch and the trees outside and the ground itself were all advancing on Darlington. Shit. Penelope was summoning her locked room clown.
What? You're telling George to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence?
What?
Calm down and think about it, Miss Della Rosa. This new evidence will shift things in favour of a guilty verdict. This trial. Everyone knows it's only happening because Ben Motorized wants revenge. The case is a mess. Everyone involved is just willing it into whatever shape they can. And once my father makes up his mind about something, he sees it through to the end. He always gets his way. And he just found the major puzzle piece that'll make that happen this time. The judge... Look, this is super off the record and all, but it's almost public knowledge he's absolutely over the moon about this new evidence. If they find George guilty, the story they have about him preparing a weapon and asking her out only to be rejected, the sheer selfishness of that motive, followed by the elaborate steps he supposedly went to obscure the truth, he'll be given the maximum sentence allowed. You'll be in prison for a long, long time, George.
But then I could live in prison with Lisa. That was my first thought, but a moment later I realised how pathetic that was and felt dizzy. I was certain Lisa would come with me to prison. It's not like I wanted that to happen, but if it did, it wouldn't be that bad, and knowing that made me willing to accept it. That's how fucked up my mind was. I was prepared to waste Lisa's life just to ease my loneliness, lessen my fear, and calm my anxiety. I wasn't just pathetic. I wasn't even a man. I was scum. I couldn't allow myself to go to prison, I thought. Lisa would absolutely come there with me, and if nothing changed I would be unable to tell her not to. As time passed, trapped in that tiny world, I was sure I would convince myself it wasn't that bad. Don't make girls protect you. Darlington had just told me that. I had to tattoo those words onto my very bones. I had to win my innocence. Darlington, I said, what is this new evidence? Please, you don't really believe I actually killed Kenton, do you? I never asked her that before, and when she didn't answer, I started getting nervous. She'd met me that day at the motorised house. Did their timeline actually seem believable to her, or was this new evidence that decisive? At last she spoke.
They found 2 witnesses. They'll testify that they saw a plane fly out of your garden, and that they saw a plane hidden in our garden. These aren't false witnesses my father hired, George.
For a moment my legs went wobbly. Their timeline had been nothing but a guess. Now that I had evidence that proved part of it, that would definitely have an impact on the trial. How do you know they aren't false witnesses? From the top of the stairs, Penelope yelled,
Stop it, George! Get away from that woman!
The entrance hall shattered around Darlington, and dirt rose up around her, forming new walls around her. I took a step closer to her, placing myself inside the walls. The moment the locked room was done, the clown would appear to hang Darlington and me.
George! Get out of there!
I ignored Penelope and kept my eyes on Darlington.
Because the witnesses are me, Darlington said, and the woman on the stairs.
What?
That crazy lady's been keeping quiet about what she saw because she thought it'd be bad for you. So have I. George, your plane flew away from here at 3 o'clock and landed at my house at 3:30. I and the lady building dirt rules around us with some mysterious power. We'll be called to the witness stand. She might deny everything, but they've already found alternative proof.
Proof? What is it?
She stopped by the house on her way home from work and saw the plane you could never get to flying away. What do you think she did? She wrote a note congratulating you. Congrats on Star Shooter's first flight, George. Won't the rain be a problem? Make sure you show me next time. P. On memo paper from work, with Starmark Trading's logo printed at the top.
I turned around, saw a mix of anger and panic on Penelope's face, and knew what Darlington said was all true, that Penelope really had seen Star Shooter fly away, and that the plane really hadn't been taken apart, but that someone had climbed aboard and flown it out of here.
George, you idiot!
Fed up with trying to get me to leave the locked room, Penelope left the top of the stairs, ran down the hall, and we could hear the door to her room slam. With her gone, the dirt room stopped growing just before it sealed itself off.
This is amazing,
Darlington said. I looked, and there was a clown made of bits of our porch standing there, a rope made from grass from our yard in its hands, looking like it was about to slip that garrote around Darlington's neck. There was another rope slung over its shoulder for me. Sorry, I said, but Darlington didn't seem upset. You weren't scared?
She wouldn't really try to kill me, and I'm not the type to give in to a threat. Nice to know someone else with a sad power like hers.
Oh, Stephen? The wound wings. But Darlington ignored the question.
Well, I'd better go, George. Think about the plea bargain. Seriously, think about it.
She turned to the walls.
Should I just break it?
She said, and gave it a push. It crumbled away around the hole she'd made, all 4 walls falling to pieces until there was nothing but a giant hole in the entrance hall.
Bye.
And with that, Darlington was gone, and when I went upstairs to Penelope, she was on her bed, crying. I didn't know what to say. Thinking of what she'd hidden the last 2 years, and how it must have weighed on her, I could never begin to express my gratitude in words. Now that it had all been in vain, and the truth had come out, and she was crying, I knew I could never comfort her. I could never cheer her up with empty words like, it'll be okay. I'd be found guilty. Penelope knew that, and that's why she was crying, and that fact was starting to sink into my thick head as well. The weight of it stole the power of speech from me. I didn't know how plea bargains worked, but perhaps we should think about it. Perhaps we should focus on getting a reduced sentence. But I hadn't killed Kenton motorised. Was this really accepting reality? As I stood there silently, I heard a voice behind me.
Heavens! What is going on here?
I turned around and found my mother standing at the doorway.
George, have you given up already?
Eh? What?
You can drive cars and you may soon fly planes, but are you actually still a child? Think.
But the situation's hopeless.
So you've given up?
What else can I do?
It's your life. Think for yourself.
Would it all be settled if I just accepted it? As the lamest thought to ever be thought ran through my head, Mother said,
"When you give up, it won't just be your reputation that's damaged. The Joestar family name, the Pendleton family name, the Starmark Trading Company name, the name of the Royal Automobile Club you introduced, and the name of anyone who befriended and introduced you, like John Moore Brabazon. And that's not all. You'd be betraying Penelope and my feelings, betraying Lisa's faith in you, and betraying that detective you were friends with, Sukamajuku. You'd hurt Stephen and Darlington Motorise as well. But above all, you'd insult poor dead Kenton Motorise. Does none of that matter to you?"
"It matters! All of it does!" I blurted. She was right. Giving up meant ignoring the consequences. How could I ever consider that not worth it? Penelope had stopped crying and sat up. She was staring at me, tears drying on her cheeks. "It matters," I said again. But what could I do about it? I didn't voice that thought. I had to think. Shit, I'd spent too much of my life relying on everyone else. My brain wouldn't budge. But that was just another way of giving up. So I have to prove my own innocence. But I couldn't just say that and have it be true. It didn't matter what the hell I felt I wanted to do. How could I go about proving I was innocent? It was patently obvious I could never have killed her. I was in fucking Rome. But that was just another dead end. If I let myself get stuck here, I'd just chase my own tail around for hours. I'd proven I was in Rome, and clinging to that fact was just being defensive. I had to go on the attack. Bring the fight back to them. But how? The police report was a complete fake. They were trying to make everyone believe a lie. We'd already made all the points we had to make. They'd managed to get everyone to ignore what we had to say. Repeating the same thing would get us nowhere. If they had new evidence, we had to bring something new to the table as well. But what? There was only one true version of my actions that day, but that argument wasn't getting us anywhere. So I had to think of something else. Something not about me. I couldn't think of anything. But the reason I thought that was because I was thinking about what I could do. What I thought I could do was less than what I could actually do, because I was pathetic like that. I could do more than that, but it was easier not to. Did I really believe I couldn't do anything? I wasn't sure, so I better think about what I should do, figure out what was needed to get me out of this mess. I had to prove I hadn't done it. But how? "Find the real killer," I said. No sooner had the words left my mouth than I started shaking like a leaf. Oh! I could feel a hot flash riding up the inside of my thighs. I'd spent all that time with the great detective Sukamajuku. When I was with him, I'd never once tried to solve anything myself, but I'd have to imitate what he'd done. I'd seen firsthand how he went about it, how he fought his way through all those mysteries. I could do this. Could I? No, I had to. Everything around me was depending on it.
"That's right,"
Mother said.
"That's also what Darlington wanted to say. Didn't you realise?"
Ah. Oh, that was why she'd come all this way to tell me. Of course Darlington would never believe I'd done it. And it was totally out of character for her to suggest pleading guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. I'm not the type to give in to a threat. That's what she said. She'd said that because I seemed like I was about to give in to one.
"Worst comes to worst, I'll tell everyone I did it, so you just do the best that you can,"
Penelope said, and I gaped at her.
"You can't, Penelope,"
Mother said angrily. Penelope just stared back at her.
"I mean it!"
Jesus, I thought. How pathetic was it I was making a girl say something like that? My whole life I'd been saved by girls. I had to do this. I swear, I'll find the real killer.
"I'll help,"
Penelope said, jumping excitedly to her feet. I hesitated a bit, remembering Darlington's line, "Don't make girls protect you." But I also remembered what Lisa said, and let her help. Finding people you can rely on gives you strength. Whether or not they can actually be relied upon is beside the question. Behaving properly meant people trusted you, tried to help you. The more people like that you had, the more you could accomplish. Instead of letting them do everything for you, you just had to do the best you could, and people would naturally step up to help you out. Penelope got Mother to give her leave from work so she could focus on assisting me. Since I was finally interested, she told me she'd actually been investigating the murder of Kenton Motorise for the last 2 years, not only solidifying details that would be needed for the trial, but also tracing the killer's actions. Since Darlington had leaked this info, admittedly disguised as a threat, she now knew that Star Shooter had gone to the Motorise manor after leaving our place. It hadn't been taken apart for transport. Flying it like a kite would have attracted attention, and the winds were too strong. So someone must have been inside Star Shooter as it flew. But who could possibly do that?
I saw your plane. It was balanced well. You were almost ready to fly it,
Stephen had said when he came to visit me. It could fly, just not support the weight of an adult. So a child? I thought. I remembered how Faraday had described Tsukumajuku. A young boy, primary or middle school. Come to think of it, I'd noticed that Tsukumajuku was floating. What if he'd been flying Star Shooter? He was a detective, and anything he tried his hand at he quickly mastered as if he's been doing it for years. He could have learned how to fly a glider in no time. Yeah, he'd come to see me. Or, wait, he said he'd come there for me, and he'd come to where I was, but he'd come from 107 years in the future. If he was coming to see me from that far away, would he be able to arrive exactly where I was at the motorized mansion? Wouldn't he have stopped by the Joestar mansion first? Then once he discovered I was out, he would have been able to use his detective skills to quickly ascertain my location and board my airplane. Because he was in a hurry. He had to join my hand with Lisa's. That was how Darlington had come to see Star Shooter abandoned at the manor. But of course Tsukumajuku would never have murdered Kenton Motorize. But the airplane had been found on the cliffs. So perhaps after moving me to Rome and Lisa, he hadn't vanished immediately, but climbed aboard Star Shooter once again and flown to the cliffs, where he found Kenton's corpse. Unable to report his discovery in person, he'd flown my plane as a kite to ensure she was discovered quickly. Which Stephen did. It made a kind of sense. In other words, the one who murdered Kenton and the one who moved the plane were different people. Forget the plane. My target had to be the murder itself. Once again we started at the Joestar mansion, following the movements of the knife with the Joestar crest on it. This had been assumed to travel with the airplane, causing confusion, but for now I was assuming it had been moved separately. Do we believe our knife was stolen the day of the crime? I asked. Penelope nodded.
That's been verified. It was stolen while the Joestar mansion housekeeper was on her afternoon break. The police checked into it, but it was an old knife, sharpened regularly over the years, and the sheen of the blade and a few small marks proved it was ours.
There was any chance of be missing earlier and simply not noticed. That would mean it and the plane didn't share started endpoints. But if that was the truth, then oh well. That means Tsukumajuku and the killer trying to frame me for Kenton's murder must have been on our property at the same time. That thought reminded me of something. Are you in some sort of danger right now? Tsukumajuku had asked me that. Turned out he was right. I was. His mysterious power had sensed it, and brought him to me and transported me to Rome. And thanks to that, the killer's plan had been thwarted for at least the last 2 years. If I'd simply gone home after speaking to Darlington, I'd have been trapped completely in his web, and thrown in jail without a second thought. Someone was out to get me. Crap. That was a scary thought. I had to find him quick. How had the knife been moved? It was an hour and a half by foot from my house to the scene of the crime. If he planned to kill Kenton, he would have started by making sure Kenton left the gates of the school, but there wasn't enough time. She left school at 3:30. She was killed at the latest at 4:10. In the 40 minutes the murder happened and Tsukumajuku found the body, tied the glider to it like a kite, and then Stephen saw it and came running. Something about that seemed wrong. Had it been pure coincidence that Tsukumajuku found her body? He was a detective. He might have had a reason to head up the cliff. Was he already thinking about it when he met me in the motorized manor? Or did he discover it after sending me to Rome? If he'd known something, why hadn't he mentioned it to me? And he wouldn't have asked if I was in danger. He'd have been more specific. Something had happened after I vanished. Something was hidden in the motorized home that led him to suspect Kenton was murdered. However, that had been my first and last time entering the main building, so I had no idea what that could be. On the other hand, that would go for Tsukumajuku as well, I thought. Keep thinking. Get back to the knife. Once Kenton had left school, it was too late, so they must have come to get the knife first, and then gone to kill Kenton on the cliff, which meant they already knew where Kenton was going that day. Who could possibly have guessed that Kenton would have gone to the cliff in that downpour? Kenton had told Stephen she was going to meet me, apparently, but who had lied to her about me wanting to meet there? They must be the killer, but they had to be someone I'd picked to give her the message. There were very few people who knew Kenton and I were close, and would think it was normal for the two of us to meet on the cliff. All of those people were very close to Kenton too. Or, I thought, perhaps meeting me was a lie Kenton herself invented. I didn't think Kenton had a boyfriend or anything, but would I have known if she had? No, I couldn't imagine any secret boyfriend would have called her to the cliff. Kenton would have seen that cliff as a place for the three of us. I was stuck again, so I went back to the knife. I still couldn't explain it at all. Were there any other clues? Penelope, about the knife. Did I find anything else belonging to the killer? As I asked, I had an idea. Footprints, for example. It had been raining that day, so it seemed likely there were tracks left when he entered the house. But Penelope shook her head.
None. The police and I both looked. But there is something strange. We found drops of rainwater from an open window down the hall into the kitchen, but no footprints, like he'd been floating in the air.
Well, that just made me think of Supercut again. But no, he had nothing to do with Kenton's murder.
Which reminds me, there are no footprints but yours in or around your tent, George. That's one reason why they suspected you.
Ah, that's because Supercut was floating. Him again. He could have done it, and that would avoid the absurd coincidence of two people with different motives in the same place at the same time. Was there no chance Supercut had taken the knife? I couldn't imagine he'd actually murdered Kenton, but given that he travelled through time to see me, was it really out of the question he'd taken a knife from my house? To protect himself? No, that didn't work. Supercut had guessed I was in danger. Perhaps he'd taken the weapon to help him protect me. Then what happened? He flew Starshooter to the motorised manor. I seemed fine. He left the house without using the knife, got on Starshooter and found Kenton while he was flying. She was dead. He couldn't report the discovery himself, so he turned Starshooter into a kite to call people to her, and left the knife there knowing full well it would be mistaken for the murder weapon? It didn't make any sense. I decided to force the hypothetical a step farther. Was there really no chance Supercut had murdered Kenton? What if Kenton had been the threat to me he'd mentioned? No, that didn't work. Kenton was my friend. Even if she wasn't the kind of girl to do anything horrible to anybody. But that meant Supercut didn't take the knife either, which meant the knife's movements were a mystery again. Since I was just sitting there thinking in silence, Penelope asked,
George, are we done with the footprints?
Ah, yeah. Sorry, I was just thinking about why Kenton would have gone to the cliff.
Oh, I did look into that, but nothing really stood out. I've questioned the students at her school, but her classmates all say there was nothing out of the ordinary that day. They all thought Kenton motorised was a little odd to begin with. She never really talked to anybody else, and even though she was attractive and well known, the boys had pretty much given up on asking her out. They didn't notice anything different that day, although the kids I spoke to were a little surprised about one thing. The school was asking about her plans for the future, and she said she was hoping to get a job after school ended. Like, she's got a title. Why would she need a job?
Huh, I thought. I'd sort of assumed she'd go on living in the motorised manor, flying planes with Stephen. But the times were changing, and maybe Kenton had more ambitious ideas.
At any rate, it's much too deserted a spot for someone to call her to, and it's too far away. Would any girl really go to a place like that alone? She ended up getting killed, but I can't imagine she'd agree to meet someone she thought might kill her in a place like that.
I dunno. I can't think of any reason why Kenton would have gone there, I groaned.
Then why not go?
Penelope suggested. Where?
To the cliff. We're just sitting here thinking, but perhaps we should start by visiting the scene of the crime.
I felt sure Supercut had often said the same thing, but it had slipped my mind entirely. 2 years since I'd been to these cliffs. A lot of memories here. This hill wasn't exactly motorised property or anything, but I found myself glancing over my shoulder as if Stephen might show up any minute. The slope down from the cliff top was gentle. There was a little forest at the bottom, and beyond that I could see the roof of the motorised manor. Stephen wasn't there, I knew. He was working somewhere in France.
This is where Kenton's body was found,
Penelope said, pointing at a large rock. Starshooter's rope had been tethered to that rock and to Kenton's body. I knew that rock. It was hard to believe anything so grisly had happened here. But that's where Stephen found her body. Kenton was stabbed 23 times in the face and the body, and tied to this rock, positioned so she was looking down at the house. When Stephen found her, she was still warm. She'd been killed not long before. Running that through my mind, something tugged at my mind again. Just like it had back at the house, when I was sitting with Penelope, thinking. Something wasn't right. What? When? Where? Supercut had flown Starshooter up here, seen Kenton and tied the glider to her as a signal. Stephen had seen it and ridden his horse up there. Somewhere in there. But what was it that was bothering me about that? Stephen's horse. Stephen had ridden a horse to find his sister's dead body. He might have started out on horseback. I looked back down the hill. On his way up the hill from the house, Stephen would have been able to see the top of the cliff, see her body long before he got here. It was a gentle slope all the way to their house. With the plane as a guide, even in the rain, he'd have seen her the second he left the woods. But if he saw Kenton lying there, why wouldn't he have sprouted wings? He would have. He always grew those wings when he was in a hurry to save someone. He wouldn't have wasted 5 or 10 minutes riding up the slope when he could be at his sister's side in a single swoop. Of course not. He would have grown them if he needed to. Stephen didn't mention that specifically, but it was a minor detail. Not important. Or was it? He'd spoken to me face to face, but didn't mention his wings. Wasn't that odd? I thought about it some more. Then a thought struck me. Sukamajuku wasn't the only one who could float above the ground. Stephen could also have flown my plane. What was I thinking? Kenton was Stephen's sister. They were very close, and they were my friends. But the wheels in my brain kept spinning. If Stephen had killed Kenton and was trying to frame me for it, suddenly everything fell into place. I told him where I was going, and with his wings he could get to my house and back in minutes. Flown to my house and stolen a knife. He could have murdered Kenton anywhere, then placed her back on the cliff top, parked the plane outside the manor to match my movements, then taken it to the cliff top and tied it to her, flying it high to explain how he'd come to find her first. Finally he called the police. Once he got home again, he'd find out I'd vanished into thin air without ever leaving the manor. Despite carefully murdering Kenton at a time I'd have trouble establishing an alibi, he played the tragic role of a brother with a dead sister, coming to visit me in jail 6 days after I'd been put there, 10 days after a death. Not because he was grieving, but because he had to wait for his back to heal, and the wings to fall off.
I believe you. You'd never kill Kenton.
Had he been lying to my face? No way. I actually shook my head, even though Penelope was looking at me. I couldn't tell her about this yet. Stephen would never do a thing like that. I kept repeating that until I remembered something else.
I know someone else with a sad power like hers.
When Darlington said that to me, was it a hint? A sad power? That made sense, I thought. That's why Ben was so hell-bent on sticking the crime on me. He was protecting his son, or at least protecting the reputation of his family name. The reason he'd let a son of noble birth go work in France was because he wanted to get him away from all this till it settled down. This also explained why the last 2 years had managed to make Darlington so intimidating and formidable. This was the formidability of a girl suddenly thrust into the centre of her family affairs, and the whole intensity of someone who'd been grappling with her family's secret all this time. Stephen, was it true? What happened? Why would you ever kill Kenton? You were so close. Until I met them. They'd flown planes together, laughing and happy. I looked up at the sky and remembered. That was it. Kenton's father would never have allowed her to get a job. She wanted freedom, would have done anything to get away from him. But leaving her father meant leaving home. And that meant leaving Stephen. That was motive enough for murder. But I thought, what need was there to frame me for the murder? Did he have reason to resent me? I don't get it. I just don't get it. I took a few unsteady steps towards the edge of the cliff, and Penelope threw her arms around me. Careful! 3 steps further and I'd have fallen, and Stephen wasn't here to catch me anymore.
That reminds me, Penelope said. Harriet Motorize, their mother, threw herself off these very cliffs. Stephen would never have let Kenton go, but Kenton said it was better to die than to be trapped in a cage her whole life. She threw herself off there to torture Stephen,
Darlington said. 3 days after my first visit to the cliffs in 3 years, neither Darlington nor I mentioned plea bargains.
I wasn't there myself, but I know what happened. Stephen first grew those wings the day he couldn't save our mother. Kenton knew that as well as I did, and she told him she'd throw herself off those cliffs over and over until she died too. Stephen couldn't stand it. Not the sadness of seeing her try to kill herself over and over again. The pain of having his wings whip out of his back every time she did. You've seen them, right, George? Stephen's wings. Those huge, painful-looking wounds. The pain he felt every time they came out must have been unimaginable. But Stephen always smiled and acted like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Wings made out of flesh and bone tearing their way out of his back. Kenton knew just how much they hurt, but she kept pushing him until he exploded. All the anger he bottled up over the years. He realised that she knew how he suffered, and kept placing herself in danger, taking advantage of him, doing whatever she liked, torturing him, both of them taking their stress out on each other. Kenton was angry all the time. Stephen was bottling up his pain, pretending not to be angry. They could never have kept that up forever, and they both understood each other perfectly. Kenton may have been murdered, but it might as well have been suicide. I'm sure that she did throw herself off the cliff, so it began and ended as a suicide. But I think this way they're both free. Freed by the clash of their emotions. But you have no proof,
Darlington said, placing a teacup on its saucer. I didn't. And you won't testify in my favour.
Of course not. I'm Darlington Motorise. I have too much I need to protect. You're a Joestar. You understand.
Did I? When I didn't answer, Darlington smiled.
You were friends with Kenton and Stephen, but you're always happier than them. You're the only heir the Joestars have. How can you be so carefree? Were you born that way? Or is it because you were brought up in a Spanish territory?
That might be part of it, but...
Or because you know someone else who carried the Joestar family for you?
That seemed closest to the mark. We'd moved Jonathan Joestar from La Palma Island to the basement here in England. He wasn't dead, and that might be part of what I felt the way I did. Like someday it'd be his day again, and I was just a temporary replacement. This was the first time I'd ever consciously thought that. If you're going to keep trying to frame me, I'll go find Stephen and make him confess, I said. Tell your father that. I may not be able to leave the country, but I can do that much. Darlington looked me right in the eye.
You've got more spine than I thought.
Yeah, I wasn't just the crap son of the Joestars. I was the boy driver gunning for the second-rank seat in the RAC.
I'll tell him, Darlington said. But there's a lot of people in on this now, and it won't be that easy to stop. The hardest thing for people to do is to know how to lower a fist once they've raised it.
I didn't care how long it took. If we were doing planes next, I had a lot to do, and a lot to learn. As I left the motorised manor for the first time in 2 years, for the second time ever, I thanked Faraday for the tea. I've no idea what he thought of me, or just how much he knew, but he fixed me with a gentle expression that stopped just short of being a smile, and said, I believe it will rain this evening, so do hurry home, Master Joestar. That reminded me. 2 years ago, that boy who came asking for me, did you happen to look at his feet? He was silent for a moment, then said, No. To tell the truth, I have done my best not to think about that visitor. Why? I found him quite sinister. I guess I can see that, but what did he look like to you, Master Joestar? He was my friend, Japanese kid. Nothing unusual, other than the fact he was floating. I see, Faraday said. To me he appeared as to be a Spaniard, a terrifying Spaniard, with no eyes. He had eyes. A Spaniard? Not a Japanese kid who spoke Spanish? Yes, he wore his hat low, hiding his face, but there were dark pits where his eyes should be. His skin was browned, like any Spanish child. He was maybe 12 or 13. I've never seen anyone Japanese, but he was decidedly not Asian. Thinking back on it now, I believe that was something evil in the shape of a child. When I heard you vanished and were discovered underground in Rome, I knew that devil had done something to you, and it made absolute sense to me. I've never spoken to anyone about this. I've been too terrified. Much too terrified. What was he talking about? He was getting up there, but hardly seemed senile. What could he have seen that rainy evening? A year later, I was cleared of all suspicion in Kenton's murder, and joined the Royal Aero Club with head held high. The year after that, John was the first Englishman to officially fly a plane on the island of Sheppey, and a year after that, in 1910, Charles Rolls died in an airplane crash, and John never again flew a plane. But there were plenty of us still flying, so I kept flying too. And an ill wind began to blow. You're a fool, George. The next war is going to be way bigger than any before, in fields, soldiers and weapons. Like John Moore Brazelbon had said, the Great War came, and with it came other evils. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The H.G. Wells. Captain Funnier Valentine spoke into his headset. Houston, we have a problem. Just like in the movies. In no time, Narancia and I were caught, our arms fastened tightly to a bed. Narancia was so confused he didn't think to use his stand. We had appeared out of nowhere a moment after they discovered the moon, and while the rest of the crew was still reeling, one man calmly began to question us. My name is Enrico Pucci. May I ask your names? Narancia didn't appear to speak English, so I answered, telling him my name and address. This made Pucci's eyes widen momentarily. What? Nothing, he said. Clearly there was something. Hey, I'm your instrument. Someone needs you. I'll take you to him. That's what Tsukumajuku had said. Who was it who needed me? What did he mean, he was my instrument? He seemed as if he knew everything, understood everything, but threw me off the deep end without even attempting to explain. Without even explaining how he came to be still alive. Was it even possible he wasn't dead? I couldn't believe that he'd been faking his death. I'd seen a photograph of Tsukumajuku, his head hanging back, cut through the neck until it was barely attached to his body. Was there any chance that photo had been a mistake, a trap, a fake? I couldn't tell from here. I stared at the pebble phone on the floor. None of the astronauts had realised it was a phone. I wondered if it could still get a signal. Stand powers could ignore the laws of physics. It would probably work just fine. If it would connect to Morio, I could ask someone to look into things for me. And your companion's name? Pucci asked, bringing me back to the present. All I knew about Narancia was his name, and he seemed disinclined to speak. So I said, he's a wise guy. Mafia is Italian, and it seemed likely Narancia would know the word gangster as well, so I did my best to allude to the truth in English. Pucci glanced down at the knife he'd taken off Narancia. There was a crest emblazoned on it, the mark of the Passion family. Pucci asked nothing further about Narancia's identity, moving on to other questions, but I didn't know how we'd come here, so I couldn't begin to answer them. When I said we'd come from Morio and Nero Island, the other crew members exchanged glances. Morio? Nero Island? Seriously, is this part of the land sailing phenomenon? Someone said. Was that what they were calling it? Very well. For the moment you'll have to stay put. For your own safety, Pucci said, and went back to the others. I tried to remember everything I'd read about Pucci in the news. Enrico Pucci's path to being an astronaut was an unusual one. He'd started out in seminary school, and had served as the priest at a prison before making a dramatic career change that had been the talk of the country at the time. When he told a reporter he was searching for a way to get to heaven, it caused quite a stir. Hey, dickhead! What the fuck's going on? What'd you stand do to us? Narancia snarled, kicking my leg repeatedly. I ignored him. The astronauts on this spaceship were all scientists, and they'd begun talking to Houston about our sudden appearance, the discovery of the third moon, and any connection there might be to the two mysteriously moving landmasses back on Earth. I kept one ear on their conversation, stared at the view out the window and thought. From the window I could see the third moon, hidden on the dark side of Mars, from a different angle than the astronauts, but the existence of this extra moon must have something to do with me being here. The timing of our arrival also had meaning. The satellite floating outside the window was very small and round, an almost perfect sphere, nothing like the other two moons. Phobos, which did 2 orbits of Mars a day at a height of 6,000 kilometers, and the even smaller Deimos, which did 4 orbits at the height of 2,300 kilometers, were both misshapen lumps of ice and rock. This third moon was unusual both as a satellite and as a celestial body. For one thing, it had no craters. No dents or bulges. It was smooth like a mirror, but it didn't appear to be made of gas or liquid. The astronauts had already determined that much in their analysis. From the infrared properties of the moon's surface, it was clearly made of rock. Had it been carved out back when Mars still had water? I wondered. But that was impossible. There were no rivers that could tumble a rock 5 kilometres in diameter. Not on Mars, which had half the dense diameter of Earth and 1/3 the gravity. What explained the lack of craters? Was it possible it had simply not been hit by any asteroid since the universe began? But how could a sphere like this be created in the first place? Even more mysterious was the moon's distance from Mars. From my eavesdropping on the astronauts' discussion, it was only 8 kilometres above the surface. Since the atmosphere of Mars was 10 kilometres, that meant it was inside the atmosphere. It should have either been flung away or crashed back into the surface of Mars, but it was staying put. Physics be damned. Just as I concluded that this moon was definitely the reason I'd been brought here, a sound like a dull chime echoed inside of me, and for a moment I got excited, thinking it was caused by getting something right, like the light bulb over a character's head in comics. Did that shit happen for real? But of course it didn't. It wasn't all in my head either. It wasn't in my head at all. It was in my belly, somewhere in my internal organs, a real sound so deep I could feel the reverb spreading through my body. What? I snapped my head round and looked at Narancia. He was glaring back at me. What? You ain't a stand master? Or is it already out? He was using his stand on me. Inside me. Stop it. I don't have a stand. What? Fucking liar. He glared at me a second longer, then broke his gaze. Whatever. If you don't want to die, don't move your head to left. Got it? Inside me there was a psh, followed by a shroom, as something went rocketing forward, filling my blood and flesh with bubbles. Shit. What had he done? It went past the back of my belly button, up past my heart, headed for my shoulder. Wherever it went, something spread from my lungs and heart like a wake, shaking them, making waves inside me. This could only be a missile. No, it had a propeller. It was a torpedo. The tip of it reached the skin of my left shoulder. Bam! It burst through the skin and shirt. Blood splattered on my left cheek. Tremendous pain followed a moment later. If I'd moved my head, would this torpedo have passed through my neck and made my head explode? I screamed, covered in blood. The astronauts came running. Or didn't. They took a step towards me, and then stopped, staring at us suspiciously. Fuckers! Narancia yelled. Why don't you come check on his wound? Don't you feel sorry for him? Valentine Pucci and the other crew members, Poco Loco 777 and Gohalai Soundman, were both just staring at Narancia, no matter how much he shouted. This wasn't right, I thought. I wasn't sure what was passing between them, but it seems Narancia and these 4 men were beginning to understand each other. And whatever that understanding was healthy. You motherfuckers can see it, right? Narancia yelled. You old stand masters! I don't care if you are or not. Die! 4 shots in a row echoed through my stomach, and cha! They rushed across my back. Pop, pop, pop! Long missiles burst out of my side, and tiny rings snapped into place in the air, and they headed for the 4 astronauts. They were clearly cruise missiles, and there was an attack submarine inside my body that had fired them. This was Narancia's stand. What are you doing? This ship's too small, I yelled, but Narancia didn't give a shit. Shut up! First blow wins, he snarled, and I rolled myself into a ball a moment before the missiles hit the 4 astronauts. I braced for impact and took a tight hold of the bed in case the hull breached, as I didn't want to be sucked out into space. I was already tied to it with a zip tie, but that was much too thin to support my entire body, though it might just cut through my wrist. I heard 4 muffled explosions, and something hit the wall. I looked up and saw a sand monster standing in front of the astronauts, all the sand swirling as it swallowed up the smoke. It was a stand. Narancia was right. Shit! Another missile was fired inside of me, passing through me and out my back, and hitting me in the wrist. And then my hand was blown clean off! I thought, but a moment later I noticed I could still feel my hand holding onto the edge of the bed. The missile didn't shoot my hand off, it shot the zip tie off. Now my hands were free. I turned to tell Narancia, but before I could, he shouted, "Wake the fuck up!" and punched me. Crack! I felt my upper left canine break, and even though the punch left me quite woozy, I clearly caught a glimpse of a white tooth and a spurt of blood flying out of my mouth. And something hiding behind the tooth. A submarine. Surfaced. Just as the tooth was about to reach the famous Native American astronaut Soundman, it was knocked back by the sand monster, and rolled sadly away into a corner. My poor tooth. A submarine that can dive into the bodies of living things, Soundman said, glaring at Narancia. But it could not escape my eyes. Narancia grinned back at him. Submarines were made for hiding. Why do you think I left it surfaced? Drops of blood landed on Soundman's face. My blood, from when the tooth was knocked out. Narancia's submarine surfaced briefly on top of the blood splatter, as if to mock Soundman, and then it began rocketing forward. I finally got it. Like Soundman said, this stand can move freely through the human body, including human blood and teeth, and almost certainly through skin and other bodily fluids as well. And if the host body touched another, it could transfer to the new one. Narancia had injured me, hoping they'd come to treat my wounds, and in the process come in contact with me. Nothing easier than tricking people who think they've got good eyes! My Das Boot is a fleet! Dive, dive, dive! Narancia shouted. Then a strange sort of gun emerged from his open mouth. The hand holding it was clearly not human. This inhuman hand pressed the gun's barrel to Narancia's forehead, and Funny and Valentine said, Hold your fire. I can kill you before your missiles explode. With Funny as Stan's arm sticking out of his mouth, whatever Narancia shouted was unintelligible. The hand vanished, and a second later, a torpedo shot into his open mouth, hit the back of his front teeth and exploded. Everything below Narancia's nose was blown clean off. Narancia had a submarine inside his own body too. When the hand dodged his attack, he'd ended up injuring himself with his own stand. But despite the scope of his injuries, Narancia was still conscious. Ah! Motherfucker! He roared, and the submarine and Soundman began pop, 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 firing a hail of missiles that Soundman's stand, the sand monster, wrapped itself around, containing the explosions in the swirling stand. Fud, 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 fud! Hugger! Eat fifth! Narancia howled, and I guess he started attacking Sandman from the inside, because there was a series of muffled splats, and the back of his NASA suit exploded. But the hand that had come out of Narancia's mouth appeared again, emerging out of the top bunk of the bunk bed, a humanoid stand with eyes like camera lenses. It pointed the weird-looking gun at the back of Narancia's head, and didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. But Narancia's head wasn't blown off, and what wounds he sustained were skin deep, because the bullets Funny as Stan fired were all exploding just before they reached his head. A series of bright fireworks went off between the gun barrel and his head, and I saw the bullets themselves bouncing off the wall nearby. Each time the gun fired, submarines floating just inside the surface of Narancia's skin fired missiles deflecting the bullet trajectory. It was an incredible sight, but in such close quarters, in a spaceship filled with delicate equipment, firing a hail of bullets and missiles was hardly the best idea. Do you want to die here, Narancia? I shouted. Even if you survive this fight, how will we get back to Earth? He was still young, still looked like a boy. Maybe I could work that to my advantage. You'll never see your friends again. Narancia hesitated for a moment. Like any young gangster, his compatriots were the only thing keeping him from being alone in the world. But, shut up! They ain't taking you here! I shame the Hessian name into the family means! He shouted like a well-trained soldier, the dark fires of a trained killer igniting in his eyes again. Shit, I thought, but then I saw him start to sweat, beads of it running down his face. Not just his face, but every inch of him. Great drops of liquid that weren't colourless at all, but green and purple all mixed together. And when I looked back up at his eyes, the gleam was gone and they were hollow and unfocused. Why? Narancia suddenly burst into tears laughing. Yeah, I can done it now. I'm gonna die here. Don't forget me. It's late. Hacio. Hissa. Jono. His face was a mess, and the drops falling off him weren't sweat but melting flesh, and clearly Narancia's entire body was rapidly rotting away. I turned around, and the astronauts had stopped attacking. Behind Enrico Pucci was a humanoid stand, with a crown-shaped mask, every inch of its body covered in letters signifying the DNA-based sequence. Everyone but him had gone back to their duties as if the battle were over. Even Soundman looked fine, but I thought his back exploded. What happened? Pucci caught my puzzled look and said, Mr. Sandman's body is almost entirely composed of sand. Since he was a child, his people are native to the desert. As he explained it, one day his body suddenly understood sand, and sand him, and he and the sand absorbed each other.
Things like this happen to humans sometimes. When people fully accept the land they live in, they become one with that land. There are not enough examples for it to have a name, but Mr. Soundman and I call it bound. People have always adapted to their environment. People in the savannah learn to see far across the grasslands, and webs grow between the fingers of professional swimmers. Even without such physical transformations, we all grow accustomed to our surroundings, learn to fit in, but this is far beyond that. Those who are bound completely merge with their environment, or become the environment itself. They don't adapt to it, they are it. And Mr. Soundman is lucky to be bound. You are not a stand master, are you, Jorge Joestar? When he said my name, I jumped. Somehow I'd fallen asleep. I looked up and Poochie stepped over to Narancia, reached out his hand and pulled two discs out of his head. Narancia had no expression and was muttering under his breath, his face and body rotting, festering, bits of him ready to fall off at any moment. Poochie had done something to me too. I didn't remember wearing a hat, but sticking out of my forehead was a visor, round and flat, some precious part of me given shape by Poochie's stand. I couldn't let him take it, I thought, but I couldn't move a muscle. I could feel my arms and legs, but they weren't mine to command. Poochie just took the disc from my head and ran his fingers across it. Only one disc. You really aren't a stand master. Oh? You're adopted. And adopted by the Joestar heir. I could hear what he said, but couldn't understand. I couldn't think at all. Poochie put the disc back in my head, and it slid smoothly back inside, vanishing without a trace. My mind returned with it. Do you know how to get to heaven? Poochie asked. Poochie'd done something to me. I assumed he'd given me enough control of my body back that I'd be able to answer his question. I tried to speak, and found that I could. Barely. Isn't that what you're supposed to tell me, Father? I whispered. Poochie's eyes gleamed. It is. You're a good detective. You always find the right answer. But not where it concerns the one who brought you here. The one who vanished soon after. You don't understand what Tsukumajuku Kaito said. Yet. He'd read my memories. By pulling that disc out of me. Watching my surprise, Poochie smiled, as if having a good day. Detectives are a wonderful thing. Everything has meaning, huh? God is everywhere, Poochie said. God is the Word. The Word has meaning. Thus everything in this world has meaning. I see. You coming here too has meaning. And you were brought here because someone here has need of you. Who could that be? Behind him, Polka Loco 777 said, Hey, there's someone else coming. He's going to destroy the H.G. Wells. What? Funnier shouted. Who? I don't know. Look, Sandman said, staring out the window at Mars. My sand's been caught by something. I could see it out the window near me too. Part of the sand Sandman had sent swirling into space was still floating there, but it was turning randomly, the shape of it shifting and morphing. You aren't doing this? Funny asked. The same question I had. Soundman shook his head. It's not me, and not the rotting Italian kid. Narancia's entire body was rotted through, and he looked ready to crumble at any moment. I could tell at a glance why he'd mentioned Narancia. The prow of his dad's boot could be seen inside the swirling vortex of sand. Soundman must have ejected the stand inside him along with the sand, but out in the vacuum of space, the sand was moving as if there were forces acting on it that couldn't possibly exist, and as it swirled, it was falling towards Mars, moving faster and faster. As we followed its path, the astronauts and me all saw the same thing. Hey, what are we seeing? What we were seeing was a black string wrapped around the mass of sand, pulling it towards the tiny new moon, floating closer to the surface of Mars. Something string-like extended from the surface of this moon out into space, and it had captured the mass of sand. Was there something on the moon's surface? Houston, are you seeing this? Funny asked. The answer came over the loudspeakers. Yes, we can't believe our eyes. We'll try and analyze it, but is someone fishing from the surface of the moon? That's the only thing we can imagine, but... Soundman,
You've lost all control of that sand? Polka Loco asked. The Native American astronaut shook his head. It's too far away. It's gone back to being normal sand. Polka Loco turned to Poochie. Yo, wake the Italian dipshit up and see if he can move this sub. Sure thing, Poochie said, and slid the disc he'd stolen from the rancher back into his melting head. And submarines appeared on the surface of my skin, and Poochie's, and the other astronauts, as if waiting for their master to reboot. 1, 2, 3... Damn, he's got a whole fleet of these things, Polka Loco said. What hell's he been through to control a stand like this at his age? He may only been 16, but he was abused by his father, betrayed by his friends, sent to juvie, bullied. Then he became homeless and was preyed upon by street gangs. The 23 people he's killed since joining the mafia were all low-life scum. No sin's worth calling a sin, Poochie said. He put the other disc back in the rancher and spoke to him in Italian. God has forgiven your sins. You will no longer act against me. Narancia went from looking like cheesecake left outside for 10 days to his old self. Even the damage he'd done to his mouth was repaired somehow. Light came back to his eyes, and he looked very surprised. Huh? I thought I killed all of you. Had he been shown an illusion? Why would you try to kill us? Poochie said. There's no need. We're your friends, and if you do as we say, we won't have to throw you off this spaceship. That clearly didn't entirely sit well with the rancher, but he didn't quite manage to argue it further, which terrified the shit out of me. Jesus, stands could control the human mind and emotions to this degree? And I knew for sure that Enrico Pucci was evil. If he had a good heart, he'd never dream of tinkering with the hearts of man like this. He wouldn't lie to them. Good is evident in deeds. Good tries to influence feelings and motives through appeals to logic and critical thought. If that deed leads to a good result, it's good. If the intent too was good, perfect. The opposite wasn't good. If the deeds caused harm, they were evil, even if the intent was good. The extenuating circumstances rendered the intent moot, and if the intent was bad, punishment should be meted out without hesitation. There are many shallow fools who put too much stock in good intentions, and a man before me was one of them. This man was so sure of his own good intent, he paid no heed to the evil he wrought at every turn. Narancia, your ship out there. Can you move it? Poochie said, pointing out the window at the mass of sand and the dust boot being pulled towards the third moon. They were quite small and far away now. It's not too far to move, but I can't move it. That sand isn't a stand anymore, is it? Strictly speaking, my dune is almost certainly not a stand, but, Soundman said, nodding. Once it gets far enough from my body, it becomes ordinary sand again. My dust boot can only move inside living things rather stands, but I can still fire missiles. Should I blow this spaceship up? Don't, Poochie said, but Narancia was grinning. Then maybe I should blow that round thing up, he said, glancing at the third moon. Poochie followed his gaze. Better not. I believe it has great meaning. Fuck that, Narancia said, goofing off. Poochie slapped him and the disc popped out of his head again. Poochie ran his fingers across it again. I despise boys who can't mind their manners, he said and put it back. Life returned to Narancia's face again. That was my bad, Father Poochie, he said, bowing his head. I promise I ain't going to be that dumb again. Lack of education decides your limits, Poochie sighed. Narancia's expression changed completely. You trying to fucking say I'm stupid? He snarled and whipped out a knife he'd kept hidden through all this turmoil. Poochie looked surprised. How? The human unconscious is beyond the reach of man. Poochie dodged Narancia's knife a few moments, got the disc out again, and had just made him throw the knife away when H.G. Wells, prepare for attack, came over the speakers. Thud. A massive impact shook the ship, and we were all flung hard into the nearest wall, or to the floor. What? Polka Loco shouted. This is Houston, the speaker said. H.G. Wells, are you safe? What was that? Funny demanded. A breakdown? We took control of the ship remotely. Emergency measures required the reverse thrusters fire for another 5 seconds. Then you'll go quiet and pull away from Mars. What? Is the mission cancelled? No, simply a temporary measure. Once you're at a safe distance, we intend to look for an angle to return. But first you need to see something. Houston was clearly struggling to keep the panic out of their voice. H.G. Wells, we found something positively unreal when we examined that image. First, the string towing the sand. Have a look at this. Everyone pulled themselves together and looked at the largest monitor in the living quarters. The image on screen was a 3D image showing the thread from the moon branching onto countless other threads, all stretched upwards. It looked like a plant, or bacteria, but instead of a root, they all led back to that sphere. The sphere was so small, and the length of the thread stretching in all directions so great that we didn't recognise it at first. The little ball in the middle was the third moon, the speakers explained as we all stood stunned. A great quantity of tentacles are reaching up from the surface of the moon. We fired the reverse thrusters before those arms could grab this ship. If you continued on course, you'd already be in a forest of those tentacles. It remains to be seen if they can snare you like they did that mass of sand. The entire crew was thinking furiously, saying nothing. That's not the end of it, the speaker continued. The next shot is from the ultra-high resolution images you sent. What it shows? We can't believe this is really happening. It showed a man with long hair. He was half naked, wearing only a loincloth, and there were horns on his head, a terrifying grin on his face. He was looking right at the camera, his eyes clearly focused directly on it. The fuck? Funnier whispered. I'm sure they heard him. The man in Houston somehow managed to scream without raising his voice. Do you see the string in his right hand? I glanced at the moment. There was a rope of some kind leading from his wrist towards the screen. That rope connects to the third moon. He's running with a 5-kilometre moon, trailing 8 kilometres above the surface of Mars like a balloon. With a single rope, he's kept the third moon trapped on the back of Mars. He's hidden the moon on the back of Mars all this time by running with it. At the equator, the diameter of Mars was 6,794.4 kilometres. That meant the circumference was 21,334.4 kilometres. A day on Mars was 24.62 hours, so at most he'd have to be running at 866.54 kilometres per hour across the surface of Mars, 240.7 metres a second, 3/4 of the speed of sound. That figure was assuming he ran constantly without sleeping or resting. The gravity was only a third that of Earth, but even so, was it humanly possible to run that fast? He appears to be standing still right now, Funnier said. Yes, that's what's so frightening. This creature can run even faster. Hey, Soundman Sand reached the moon, Pocoloco said, looking out the window. Narancia had been watching all this absently, but suddenly he frowned. My dad's boot's moving again, huh? That's weird. It's on the surface of the moon. A headset periscope appeared over Narancia's right eye, and he peered through it. I don't know much about these things, but the moon's alive? What was he talking about? While I stared at Narancia confused, Pocoloco screamed. We all looked through the window and saw what he'd seen. In the distance, we could see the tiny moon hovering, and could see that it had turned to face us. The moon was a giant eyeball, and the lid had just opened. It looked exactly like Odilon Reden's The Eye Like a Strange Balloon Goes to Infinity, or Mizuki Shigeru's faux American yokai, Backbeard. Just as I was about to belatedly scream myself, boom! Another huge impact rocked the ship without any warning. Rolling on the floor, I realised this lurch was in the opposite direction from the first, which meant the floor seemed to heave upwards, the whole ship tilting. The reverse thrusters must still be firing. I looked out the window and saw black threads wrapped around the H.G. Wells. They'd caught us. God fucking damn it. Dust spray rose from the third moon. It looked like Narancia was attacking it with dust boot. Dozens of submarines were riding the threads wrapped around the H.G. Wells. All fired cruise missiles at the third moon. Boom, 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 boom. Hundreds of missiles all rocketing forward in unison, raining down on the giant eye moon's face. And then the face opened its mouth. A crescent moon slit right below the eyeball that split the moon from end to end, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The maw gaped open until it was the entire visible surface of the moon. The moon had a thin surface layer, but the inside was hollow. It was a 5-kilometre balloon held by the horned man on Mars. A living balloon, with one giant eyeball, and infinite hands that stretched all the way to outer space. Every missile Narancia's dust boot fleet fired was swallowed up by the mouth. Only when the last one was stuffed in its cheeks did the mouth close, and it savoured the flavour of the massive array of explosions within. The impact shook the hands dragging us. Narancia stared in disbelief.
Fucking seriously? I didn't even scratch it!
Poochie's eyes were open wide. He seemed equally surprised and impressed. Astonishing. I feel sure we travelled this far from Earth for just this encounter. H.G. Wells, this is Houston, the man on the loudspeaker said. The President would like a word with you. Funnier looked grave. Pocoloco frowned. The funniest? Without waiting for a response from us, the voice on the speaker changed. A calm, gentle voice, ever so slightly brisk. To all aboard the H.G. Wells, I am the President of the United States, the funniest Valentine. Presently, I am at the UN headquarters in New York, attending an emergency meeting of the Security Council. We're discussing how to deal with the mysterious life form discovered behind Mars, what we're currently calling the eyed balloon. I'm here to report our current progress. Wrapped in the moon's tentacles, the H.G. Wells spun, shaking constantly. The funniest continued. I'm sending enlarged photographs of the eyed balloon's interior. A still image of the moon with its mouth fully open appeared on the screen, with 7 different circles inscribed on it. Next, enlargement of the circled portions. 7 different high-resolution shots began cycling the screen. What had appeared smooth before now showed something odd. Part of some machine floating against the back of the moon's interior. What? Is that a man-made satellite? No, Pocoloco said. That's a probe. With those armoured plates and mirrors, could it be? Yes, Specialist 777. This is the unmanned probe the ESA launched in 1985 to survey Halley's Comet. We verified the COSPAR ID on the probe surface. 1985-056A. On one of the 7 shots, there was a number written on the 2 machines. 2? No fucking way, Pocoloco muttered. But this is in fact happening, the funniest replied. The 7 spacecraft in these pictures are all the same ship, identical in every way. Every one of the 7 passed inside Halley's Comet on March 14th, 1986, photographed the core from a distance of 600 kilometers, and vanished in 1999. They are all the Jojo probe. Father, with the time you spent in space, you know very well we do not launch the same ship 7 times, and we never repeat the same COSPAR ID. There's no possibility that some conspiracy resulted in the launch of multiple identical ships without America's knowledge. Manufacturing and launching a probe is very expensive, and there's no way to fire a rocket without the citizens noticing, and no means to fund such a launch. So 7 Jotos were eaten by the eyed balloon, snared by these tentacles. These tentacles had a range of around 100 kilometers, but that was nothing compared with the vastness of space. It seemed highly unlikely Jojo would have flown within range. As we all scratched our heads, Narancia kept up his futile attack. Beside him, Poochie looked as astonished as I was, but was almost rapturously muttering. Do the 14 words have meaning? The 14 words. He seemed to be seeing and thinking something entirely different from the rest of us. 7 Jojo probes. There might be even more, but whatever truth lay behind this mystery, the H.G. Wells was about to be swallowed by the balloon with us on board. Just a quick glance outside the window, and the spinning view of the eyed balloon's giant round face and eyelid was noticeably closer. And this photograph was collected from a Nazi base in Switzerland during the Second World War, the funniest said over the speakers. I hadn't expected the word Nazi to show up here, but that surprise was dwarfed by the shock of the picture that had appeared on screen. It showed the horned man, the same man currently holding the tether down on Mars. Long narrow eyes, long black hair, surrounded by Nazi soldiers, yet grinning wickedly. Once again, his eyes were focused right on the camera lens. This man's name is Kars, the funniest said. Much about him remains a mystery, but there are 5 things we know for sure. He was one of the pillar men discovered by Nazi scientists underground in Mexico and Italy. Of the 4 pillar men they collected, only Kars survived. It seems that Kars was somehow caught up in a volcanic eruption at Italy's Isulo volcano and flung out of the atmosphere. Surely before that, Kars How exactly is unknown, but he donned a stone mask fitted with the Arja red stone, bathed in ultraviolet light, and became the ultimate life form. The last thing we know is that the man who beat the other 3 pillar men and sent the ultimate cars into space was an Englishman residing in America named Jorge Joestar. What? That was my great-grandfather's name, the grandfather of my adoptive father, John the Joestar. I believe you have a Jorge Joestar on board, asked the American president. Will you tell us why and how you came to the H.G. Wells? Funny and the crew all turned and stared at me. The gleam in Poochie's eyes was especially terrifying. I did my best not to look at him, and answered in English. I was hoping you could tell me. Either way, this cannot be a coincidence, the funniest said, dropping the matter. That's everything we've discovered at present. As for the conclusion of the Security Council, you have 10 minutes to escape the tentacles. Once that 10 minutes is up, we will detonate the H.G. Wells remotely. There will be no rescue mission. Our top priority is preventing Ultimate Cars from returning to Earth. Are these orders understood, Father? Eh? Detonate? If we didn't escape the tentacles in the next 10 minutes? Why didn't you say that first? Then I realized the deeper meaning. They already knew it was impossible. They were going to blow us up no matter what. I checked the view outside the window. The tentacles were wrapped around and around us, and there were a lot of them. Narancia had ignored this entire conversation since he didn't speak English, and was still attacking, but his dust boot fleet didn't appear to have done any damage at all. His efforts had been so utterly futile there were tears in his eyes. Funnier spoke to his son.
Understood, Mr. President. Completely.
The transmission ended, and the image on the screen switched back to the photo of cars. Funny's eyes had been like daggers when he spoke to his son, but when he turned around he was a different man. Calm but assured, he proceeded to bark orders at his crew.
Poco Loco! Think of a way to cut the tentacles of the H.G. Wells. While you're at it, find the explosive device and expunge it from the ship. Poochie, Soundman, Narancia and I will do whatever we can to kill these cars, whatever he is. Detective!
Yes?
It seems you were brought here for some higher purpose. You don't have a stand, do you? Then make like a detective and solve some mysteries. You heard that order? We've got 9 minutes left. Whatever reason or purpose brought you here, we're all in the same boat now. All you could do is think as hard as you can, as much as you need.
Sir, yes, sir, I said, and attempted a salute. I didn't intend it to be comedic. Funny was absolutely right. I was here because I was a detective. I had to do my job.
Jorge Joestar,
Soundman said. I turned around and found him in his spacesuit, kneeling beside me. He pointed at Narancia.
He doesn't speak English, right? Can you interpret? He seems to have a number of tiny submarines, but can he combine them into one big one?
Ah! God fucking damn this piece of shit! How the fuck can he shake off my missiles like a 38-degree lukewarm shower? Fuck! He was half mad now. I tapped him cautiously on his shoulder. Fuck off! Oh, what? I told him Soundman's suggestion, and his eyes went wide. I never even thought of that. I'm not stupid or anything, but fuck! Let's do this! Das Boot! Retreat and regroup! Dozens of submarines came rocketing back up the balloon's tentacles. Soundman stood quietly, watching them a moment, then put his helmet on and spoke to Funnier.
I'll go listen to the sands of Mars and understand them.
Funnier nodded.
I'm sure you can befriend Mars.
Poochie appeared beside them, also in a spacesuit.
I'll come too, to talk to him. You've only ever cared about the way to heaven, Poochie. I seem to have a higher goal, Funnier Valentine. In the fog of war, all will be left to destiny. Pray worry not about my life. I will not yet die. Not here, at least.
Narancia started shouting. Ha! I did it! I fucking did it! A full-power dust boot! Anyone wants to ride? Get the hell on now! Outside the windows was a nearly life-size submarine. H.G. Wells was a sphere with a diameter of about 10 meters, with a pair of 2-meter-tall cylinders on either side that housed the emergency escape system, and a dock that allowed them to connect to other ships. Narancia's dust boot was far larger than the entire thing, at least 100 meters long, like a building lying on its side.
Soundman! Poochie, you have 3 minutes, Funnier said. If you don't end the fight and get back in here in that time, the H.G. Wells will leave without you. Shouldn't you join us on this ship? Poochie asked. The H.G. Wells was placed in my care. I share its fate. Very well.
Soundman and Poochie both headed for the airlock, and after decompression travelled through the vacuum of outer space to the submarine. But their movements weren't the floaty movements of normal astronauts. The second the hatch opened, they zipped right over, flying directly into the submarine. Stands came in handy. Narancia, let's go, Poochie said in Italian. I could hear his voice coming over Narancia's headset. Right, full power, forward thrust, dust boot, go! Dust Boot swooped away from the H.G. Wells, spinning on the slender tentacles, headed for the eye balloon at tremendous speed, already opening fire. Pew! The cruise missiles it fired were all full-size too. Missile after missile scored a direct hit on the balloon, the explosions and shock rays far stronger than anything before. The balloon closed its one big eye. Was it working? Right! Got it, Captain! Pocoloco shouted. Right Stuff has found a way to escape the tentacle's web. I looked over and found him holding his hands in front of his chest, palms facing each other forming a sort of bowl, and strange little gnomes of some kind inside. They were making tiny models of the H.G. Wells, then taking them apart, analysing the problem. If we release all the exterior walls of the H.G. Wells from the inside, we'll be free. The tentacles are wrapped around the cylinders and the sphere from one side, so this should stabilise us. If we start the engines at full power the second the walls release, we'll leave the walls in their grip and escape like we're shedding our skin. A spaceship isn't going to catch cold going naked. Then we'll move on to removing the explosive device. Right Stuff has already located it. Good, Funnier nodded. Get to it. Keep me updated on your progress. I got this. The gnomes hopped up on his shoulders, and Pocoloco dashed out of the living quarters. Funnier watched him go, then turned back to us. What do you make of this way to heaven Poochie talks about? What the hell was he on about? Was this really the time to talk about this? The ship was going to explode in less than 8 minutes, wasn't it? Was he that sure Pocoloco would pull him off? Ooh. Was he that sure Pocoloco would pull it off? Funnier Valentine seemed totally at ease, but not in the way a captain certain of his crew's ability would be. He kept talking. When Enrico Pucci was 17, he began sleepwalking. 2 or 3 times a month he'd leave the house fast asleep and wander quite a ways from home. His family moved to Cape Canaveral, Florida, because they were worried their eldest son would be hit by a car, and thought a place with few residents, open landscape, and plenty of military and government officials would make it easier to locate their son. Cape Canaveral's home to the Kennedy Space Center and an Air Force base, you see. It's patrolled 24/7. But one evening he slipped out in his sleep and awoke outside the gates of the church his father worked at. It was 5 a.m. Normally he'd have been found by the patrol guards and returned to his home, still asleep. So this was the first time he'd been out all night since moving to Cape Canaveral. Poochie's father and mother had a habit of waking up at 4 in the morning and checking to see if he was still in his bed. So he imagined they were worried sick, ran home barefoot, and discovered he no longer had a family to worry about him. Poochie's home had vanished, replaced by a crater 17 meters in diameter, a direct hit by a meteor. But the strangest part was, nobody had noticed the meteor falling. The meteor had evaded both the Space Center and the Air Force radar. Standing alone in front of this crater, stricken with grief, Poochie found the thing that had killed his family. It wasn't a rock fallen from space, but a metal plate, a man-made heat shield. This, Funnier said, putting an image of a rectangular metal image up on the screen, with 2 rows of letters written on it. One was painted on the side and read 1985-056A. This is the co-spy ID of the Jojo probe, Funnier said. In July 1997, it didn't respond to signals from NASA when it passed by the Earth. But it did send us one signal. It fell from the sky, killing Enrico Pucci's father, mother, and younger brother, leaving only him alive. Jojo again. But that again was not only referring to the 7 Jotos inside the eyed balloon. The other row of letters on the metal plate, scratched there by something sharp, also said Jojo. And there were more words as well. 14 phrases in all, a mix of Italian and English. Spiral staircase, rhinoceros beetle, desolation roll, fig tart, rhinoceros beetle, via dolorosa, rhinoceros beetle, singularity, Jojo, angel, hydrangea, rhinoceros beetle, singularity, secret emperor. Funnier smiled.
You saw how flustered Poochie was before?
Poochie was a priest, not a detective, so he may have found it hard to believe, but everything has meaning.
There's also a message on the back of the plate. This is the main one,
Funnier said, changing the image on screen. Another 3 rolls of English words scratched into the metal. Have the courage to cast aside your stand, and as your stand withers, it will gather 36 souls and give birth to something new. It will befriend he who says the 14 words. The place is 28.24 degrees north, 80.36 degrees west. I didn't know what that meant, but I had an idea. Mars has longitude and latitude, I explained. Wilhelm Beer and Johann Heinrich Madler made the first maps of Mars, and they selected a small circle as a base point for the prime meridian. That point's still in use today, under the name Aries 0. And there.
Exactly,
Funnier noted.
And on Mars, at that exact point, Kars stands, holding the tether that leads to the eyed balloon. Kars is there as we arrive, and we arrived as he was there.
Funnier chuckled.
Poochie said he's going to talk, sure that he alone will find the way to heaven. Rather selfish for a servant of God, wouldn't you say? Will the staircase to heaven really open for one so impetuous?
I followed Funnier's gaze and looked down at the surface of Mars. The submarine had already landed on the surface, and Poochie had stepped out onto the ground. He was walking towards Kars.
What the hell? He's in the way!
Narancia muttered behind me. He hadn't understood a word of what Funnier and I were talking about in English. Despite his griping, his attack never let up, a never-ending rain of cruise missiles turning the surface of the balloon into a perpetual explosion. There were holes opening in the surface, so he was clearly doing more damage than he had with this submarine separated, but the holes closed up again the moment they formed.
How is this even possible? Fucking break, you piece of shit! Fucking piece of shit!
He sounded like someone raging in a video game. I glanced back at Poochie. Was Funnier right? Was there meaning to the 14 words written on the back of the plate, what Poochie called the way to heaven? Was asking that question in the first place a waste of time? As I thought, I realized the view through the window had settled down, the tentacles had released their grip, and the ship had stabilized. Pocoloco's voice came over the loudspeaker. Right, Valentine, ready to start those engines? But Funny ignored him. Instead, he turned towards me and put his fingers to his lips. Shh. Not like my voice would reach him and his headset mic wasn't even on, but... Valentine? Hey, what's going on? Right stuff, someone go see. Funny ignored the panic in Pocoloco's voice too.
By the way, Jorge Joestar, do you know how to pilot this ship?
He asked.
I don't imagine that to be the case, but I understand detectives tend to get interested in and study up on a great many things.
Why was he asking me that? No, I know the basic gist of spaceship construction, but not the specifics of piloting them. The computer controls a lot of systems, but even then, it requires detailed interplay between you and the engineers, right? Before and after launch, there's no way you can fly a spaceship without substantial practice and simulation.
Correct! I'm relieved to hear it,
Funnier said, and I felt something moving behind me, and turned to see Funnier's stand moving away from me. Gun in hand. The window it was looking through, a weird sort of flat plane, disappeared, leaving behind only a steel ladder. It had been behind me, pointing a gun at me.
Your presence here seems to have some meaning,
he said, with a smile that told me everything. He was up to something, and was about to set that in motion. With his stand. He'd used his stand 3 times so far. It had shown up inside Narancia's mouth, from the upper level of the bunk bed, and now from an iron ladder. When it appeared, a flat area like frosted glass cut through the space around it. The stand appeared from that window. It seemed like it probably required a frame. He could make a window in any frame and his stand would look out of it. Pocoloco's voice came over the speaker again. Valentine, you motherfucker! Bang! A gunshot. No sound followed. I turned around and saw one of Pocoloco's gnomes standing still at the entrance to the living quarters. As I watched, it faded out and vanished. Funny had shot Pocoloco, and mostly likely killed him. Yo, what the fuck was that? Narancia said. That was a fucking gunshot. Who'd this asshole shoot, Joestar? Huh? The stand's arm emerged from his mouth mid-shout and pressed the gun of its barrel of its gun to his forehead.
It was a mistake sending all your submarines to Mars,
he said in English, knowing full well Narancia wouldn't understand him.
And you have a very foul mouth.
Bang! Narancia fell over, blood streaming from his head, and the stand's arm vanished from his mouth. I looked down at Mars from the window. The dust boot that had been resting on the balloon's tentacles vanished too.
Narancia, what happened?
Pucci's voice came over the speaker, in Italian.
Something going on up there?
Narancia, he just died,
Funny replied in English.
How's your conversation going? I've been wondering this for a while, Pucci. So let me ask. Tell me the truth. Have you ever, even once, actually believed in God?
What?
Of course you haven't. You're the most self-absorbed man I've ever met. You only became a priest because it made you feel good about yourself. You feel no love or compassion for your fellow man. I condemn you, Enrico Pucci. You are a sinner for seeking a way to heaven for yourself alone. When you should be leading others, you will be punished. This empty red planet is beautiful, isn't it? Allowing you to die here is an expression of the deep, genuine compassion I have for you.
Being here is destiny, the will of God.
This way to heaven you speak of, you know nothing. That's why you cannot talk to cars. I've been negotiating with cars for the last 11 years, ever since I first read the message on the plate that fell on your house.
Rear window. He was peeping,
Pucci said. Funny glanced at me when he said this, so I knew it must be the name of Funny's stand. Rear window, a stand that could make a window in any frame and move to it. The name was a good fit.
Peeping? How rude. I was simply checking on a suspicious unidentified falling object,
Funny said.
I was already training as an astronaut at Cape Canaveral the day it fell. I was out on the town and sneaking back to base. But after catching a glimpse of that plate, I never snuck out again. It was clear evidence there was an intelligent life form outside this planet. If a square plate fell, then there was a square hole somewhere. It was comparatively easy to find it. That's when I met all the cars.
Huh? Plural.
Your way to heaven ends here, Funny said. It brought you to Mars. Let that thought comfort you in your eternal slumber, Enrico Pucci.
God's will is with me.
That's a delusion.
Bang! A third gunshot rang out. And then there was silence. I looked down at the surface of Mars, but Pucci was too far away to make out clearly. I knew he must be at the bottom of the anchor line leading from the balloon, but...
Now then, Govalai Soundman, a quiet man despite your name. The time has come for you to break your silence.
There was no answer.
I know you aren't scared. What are you doing?
I could see it. A long shadow on the surface of Mars, getting bigger by the second. A massive pillar of sand stretching up towards us, straight towards this ship. All the sands of Mars, rushing together, feeding the pillar's growth. The pillar inhaled the sands. Soundman. He'd listened to the sands of Mars and understood them. The sands of Mars were part of Sandman now. In no time the pillar had left the atmosphere and the tip was approaching the H.G. Wells. It was only a few kilometres away.
Oh, well done, Soundman,
Fania had come over to the window beside me and was watching the pillar approach.
I take back what I said. You are a deep and sound man, as your name suggests.
Was that clear-eyed Native American about to die too? Stop! I said, but saying that wasn't going to do anything. He decided to kill all the astronauts but himself. The only way I had of stopping him was physical. I grabbed the knife from Narancia's corpse and lunged at Fania's throat, but he dodged and kneed me hard in the gut.
Be still, Jorge Joestar. Now I am paying my respects to Soundman's finale.
He took the knife away from me and stuck it in my right shoulder. Now both of my shoulders were injured, and I couldn't lift either arm.
To which, goodbye, Soundman. It was an honor to come this far with you,
Fania said. There was another gunshot. Silence again. I looked over my blood-stained shoulder at the window. The tip of the column rising from Mars to the heavens was only a few 100 meters away. It was still getting closer. Fania saw it too.
Soundman, are you still alive?
He could control his stand remotely, but not see what it saw. Bang, 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 bang! The gun kept firing, but the tip of the pillar kept advancing. It was only 100 meters away. Close enough now I could see it with my naked eye. There was an empty helmet at the top of the pillar, and Fania's camera-eyed stand was clinging to it, firing into the sand, opening hole after hole. But Soundman's head was nowhere to be seen.
Soundman! Where are you?
Fania screamed. I stood watching helplessly as the tip of the pillar changed shape, forming a round hole in the rim. Like a docking hatch. Soundman was inside the pillar. In less than 2 minutes, he'd gone from the surface of Mars to the H.G. Wells. A trained astronaut could easily hold his breath in the pillar that long. Bang! The tip of the pillar slammed into the H.G. Wells, shaking the ship.
Good Lord! Come back, Rear Window!
At his call, the stand reappeared in the doorway to the living quarters. Clang! Thud! Thud! The sounds of sand pounding the door, smashing it open, and then scrunch, 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 scrunch as sandy footsteps came down the hall. Soundman appeared, covered head to foot in the red sands of Mars. Even his face was hidden. On guard against Fania's rear window, the Native American astronaut was still holding his breath. Fania's face twisted in fear.
Good God! Shoot him, Rear Window!
Bang, 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 bang! Fania's stand unleashed a volley, but every bullet was absorbed into the sand as Soundman charged, tackling Fania.
Ah!
Fania's scream vanished into the sand. Shunk, 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 funk, funk, funk! Unable to see it all, Soundman went berserk, swinging and kicking wildly, flinging hardened sand in all directions. I barely managed to evade getting hit myself, but he was smashing machine parts right and left. I figured it was up to me to tell Soundman if Fania was dead or down for the count, so I looked around and realised I couldn't find him anywhere. There was a door in the wall he'd been flung against, and through the window I could see the escape pod that was supposed to be on the other side of that door. It had detached from the H.G. Wells and was drifting away. Soundman! Outside! Fania Valentine's escaping! I could see Fania grinning through the pod's window. Rear Window was in a hole Soundman had punched in the computer, waiting for Soundman to stop flailing and take a breath. Don't show your face! Rear Window's still got his gun pointed at you! I yelled, but too late. Out of breath, Soundman let the sands part, and Rear Window's bullet struck him right between the eyes. Bang! Soundman's head jerked back and the sand suit crumbled. Soundman! I could hear Fania laughing over the loudspeaker.
Goodbye, Soundman. Jorge Joestar. I do apologize, but that ship will explode in 2 minutes. If you really are brought here by fate or destiny, then I'm sure you'll find a way to survive that explosion.
On my knees on the floor, my shoulders throbbing with pain, I couldn't summon the energy to stand. I just vacantly watched his escape pod slowly drift away, not even noticing the submarine that had appeared behind him on the eyed balloon. Astronauts suck ass at murder. They don't even know the basics. Double tap, motherfucker. One shot ain't enough. Always gotta hit him again to be sure. Every fucking gangster knows that shit. I turned to find Narancia behind me, a small submarine sitting in the hole the bullet left in his forehead. The bullet was caught in the side of the ship. He'd left one ship from his stand inside his body. Takes too long for that food to get back to me if I send it away, so Bucciolati and John are always yelling at me to leave 1 or 2 inside me. Narancia grinned. Funny noticed him, and I could see him looking through the tiny window of the pod, surprised, and oblivious to the cruise missile coming up behind him. It hit the pod head on. Boom! I couldn't actually hear the sound, but the escape pod exploded with Funnier on it, scattering debris all around. Rear window faded out and vanished. Ha! Suck on that! Narancia yelled, pointing his middle finger at the remains of the pod. Then he turned to me. Don't just fucking stand there. We're getting out of here pronto. Eh? But how? Let's start by hopping on my sub and going down to Mars. But don't we need to depressurize? What does that even mean? It'll be fine. It really won't. I said it will. Think positive, motherfucker. While we were talking, the giant submarine had come up with tentacles from the ide balloon and rammed into the side of the H.G. Wells. The deafening crunch as it hit was accompanied by a violent impact that shook the entire ship, followed by the whoosh of air rushing out. There was a hole in the front of the sub too. Fuck yeah! Get the fuck in here! Narancia yelled, diving headlong across the rubble, riding the rush of air, letting the submarine inhale him. Alright, here goes nothing! I shouted, and threw myself after him, aiming for the hole, but my shoulders hurt and I lost my balance. I slipped right past the hole, heading for the gap in the side of the H.G. Wells. There was nothing out there, just outer space. I screamed, and the submarine's engines fired. It passed me, placed its hull just outside the gap, and caught me after only a moment of suitless spacewalk. Holy fuck, dude! You're really shit at this, Narancia said, laughing. I couldn't argue with that. On your feet! We gotta get in bed, Narancia said, helping me up and giving me a shoulder for support. We ran against the air rushing out the gap in the hull, down a narrow hall towards the tail of the submarine. I've never been inside my stand before. Man, it's real good looking. Indeed, there were instruments and pipes, and everything a real submarine would have inside it. We ran the entire length of Das Boot, went through a tiny hatch, and Narancia closed the door behind us, locking the door with a round reel. Okay, do a U-turn and get us out of here. The submarine groaned and started moving. I could hear gas rushing through the pipes. Narancia had lowered his headset periscope over his right eye and was piloting Das Boot, running it down the tentacles to the ide balloon, around the surface of the moon, and then down the tether rope. Inside Mars's atmosphere, the planet's gravity took hold, and we were forced to hang off the pipes crossing the long hallway, now a vertical shaft, as the submarine descended straight down. Narancia held on with both arms, but I was forced to hang on with my legs. Peering through the periscope, Narancia asked, So, what are we going to do about this half-naked, long-haired dude? Cars, the ultimate thing. What should we do? It'll be useless, but I could shoot him again? Narancia suggested, half joking. Nah, I said. You've attacked him plenty, and like you said, it was useless, and he hasn't done anything to us yet. But what should we do? Try to talk to him? Poochie had tried, and that got him exactly nowhere, apparently. Right, when we're 3 meters off the ground, stop! There was a horrible screeching, and we stopped. We were inside the atmosphere, near the surface of Mars, but we had no spacesuits. The air outside was less than 1% the atmospheric pressure of Earth, and was 95% carbon dioxide. We wouldn't be able to breathe at all, but we couldn't stay in Das Boot forever. We had a limited amount of breathable air on board. We were between a rock and a hard place, but we were still alive. The spaceship blew up, Narancia said, showing me the view through his headset. There were massive fireworks in the skies of Mars. There was also a moon with an eye rising in the sky. The eye met my gaze. Creepy, I said. As I handed the headset back to Narancia, we heard creaking outside the hatch. Someone was coming up the vertical hall. There was a big hole in the front of the sub, and outside that hole was... the half-naked dude's gone, Narancia said. Cars had invaded Das Boot. That meant he must be able to see stands. The ultimate life form was getting closer. My body went rigid, when Narancia yelled down the hatch below us. Hey! I don't know what the fuck you are! Don't smash my sub! This room's the only place with air left! I'm sorry about attacking you earlier. Seriously, super duper, legit sorry. It was clear he'd never been taught how to apologise to anyone. There was a groan outside, like metal bending, then a scuttling sound as something moved through the pipes, getting closer, into the room we were in. Here. Narancia and I gulped in unison, and a pipe in front of us popped open, and flesh spilled out, and the flesh took form, becoming a tall, long-haired, half-naked man. Cars. He could shapeshift. He turned and twisted the pipe like a twist tie, cutting off the hiss of escaping air. He looked around the interior of Das Boot as if he couldn't see us, and then took a deep breath. In and out.
Of air,
he said in Italian.
You have no idea how much I've missed it.
He smiled.
It's time to go home.
Home? Where? Narancia asked, but Kaz ignored him.
This air, with 3 of us, it should last 4 hours.
Hey! Don't fucking ignore me, Fabio! Narancia snarled. This boy knew no fear. I poked him. Dude, back to Earth, obviously. Huh? He's not like a Martian? He's speaking in Earth language, right? He must have been there originally. Oh, I see. But how are we getting back home? The ship blew up. True, but then I remembered. He's got a ship. At least 7 of them. The Jojo probes. Those were technically spaceships, but they had no power and were pretty busted up, and no fuel. As I thought, Kaz said,
I have a ship.
We could communicate? But they're broken, right? I asked. Kaz looked at me. His eyes were a really beautiful blue.
I can fix them. Since I rode here from Halley's Comet, I've been studying how these machines function.
When Jotos passed Halley's Comet, something had gone wrong with the antenna, and all contact with it had been lost for 32 minutes. Had that not been because comet dust struck it, but because cars jumped on board? But we'll need fuel.
I have plenty.
Where?
Floating above us.
The eyed balloon. Is that... What is it?
Extra me's.
Extra...
Yes, the universe has looped 36 times, and as it ended and began anew, 36 additional me's arrived.
There it is. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. 36 cars on Mars. The ultimate life form could even survive the end of the universe. If the universe looped, then history repeated itself. The same fate befell Cars, and he became the ultimate thing 37 times, was flung into space 37 times, made his way to Mars 37 times, and then all 37 cars had a team-up? While my mind boggled at the sheer scale of that time, Narancia stopped staring at us open-mouthed, peered through his periscope and said, Hey, the moon broke! He showed me the view. The eyed balloon had crumbled, and the 36 pieces each turned into cars. They had combined their flesh, and had stretched their combined mass out into a giant sphere. Now they had the 36 Jotos they'd held inside the sphere all began falling towards us, because of course, that makes sense.
We'll use a few to repair the machines, and the rest will become fossil fuel,
Cars said. Cars began laying parts from the Jotos out on the surface of Mars, and assembling them bare-handed into a spaceship way more futuristic than either the Jojo or the H.G. Wells. When he didn't have a part, he'd have one of the extra cars transform part of their flesh, transforming it into the material he needed. Once the ship was complete, the remaining cars all melted away without complaint, pouring themselves into the fuel tank. Narancia witnessed this horror show with a series of yelps and squeals, unable to watch it directly, but shocked as I was, I couldn't stop myself from watching the whole thing. Because, you know, when you have 36 of yourself, you turn them into fuel for a spaceship. That makes sense. The completed spaceship was conical with smooth curves. The one remaining cars came back up the pipes to us and spoke to Narancia.
Shrink this vehicle to the size of the 2 of you. I'll compress the remaining air.
Narancia did as he was told, and soon Das Boot was so small the 2 of us could barely fit inside. Cars then inhaled all the air into his lungs. Narancia and I clung to each other inside the submarine, and Cars doubled the size of his upper body, lifted the submarine onto his back and carried it onto the spaceship. He released the air inside, and Narancia put Das Boot back inside his own body. The interior of the ship was beautifully designed. It was hard to believe it had been pieced together from scrap. It looked like a modern sci-fi movie set. If you could build all this, I asked, summoning my nerve, why not head to Earth on your own?
At first, I didn't have enough materials or extra me's to turn into fuel,
Carl said.
My calculations showed it would be the 37th universe where I would finally have enough. Twice I rolled Jojo close to the Earth. The first we passed too far from it. The second time I altered Jojo and turned part of myself into fuel in an attempt to enter the atmosphere.
Jesus Christ.
But I had no idea what the correct angle of entry was. If the angle was too shallow, I'd bounce off the atmospheric wall. Too steep, and my calculations suggested that at my bulk I would vaporize faster than my cells would regenerate. Even if I survived long enough to land, I would be critically injured. I'd be captured by humans who detected my entry and sent even farther away on a different rocket. I had to come up with a plan to protect myself while attempting my return to Earth.
After the Jojo probe had surveyed Halley's Comet, it had done a flyby of Earth at a distance of 16,300,000 kilometres and used the Earth's gravity to accelerate, heading off to survey Comet Griggs. After that, it approached the Earth again, but didn't respond to signals and disappeared. This must be the 2 occasions he mentioned. Countless asteroids hit the Earth daily, but almost none of them ever reach the surface because the speed with which they strike the atmosphere causes high pressurized convection heat, and the magnetic energy in the air causes radiation heat, which burns the meteors up before they land.
Once I reached Mars, I patiently waited for the right time. The universe first looped 36 times, and I had enough fuel and materials. And in this 37th universe, I met an asteroid named Funnier Valentine. Funnier helped me draw up a plan for re-entry, and negotiated a mutually profitable arrangement, in which, in exchange for his help, I agreed to not eat any Americans. I accepted his offer, and waited for him to arrive.
I see. But why would Funnier want to help such a dangerous life form get back to Earth? Wait, eat? You eat people? I asked. Cars looked me right in the eye.
Why do you think I would let you live? Like I said, we only have 4 hours worth of oxygen. Fueled by the extra me's, this ship would take approximately 6 months to reach Earth. You would never survive it. Remain calm and allow me to eat you.
Wait, you survived all this time on Mars without eating anything, right? Narancia yelled. You could damn well last another 6 months, asshole! Narancia yelled. So what if we only have 4 hours worth of air? This ship we can do in 4 hours.
As the universe looped 36 times, I have done laps of Mars without eating. Until today. While it's not my usual custom, think of it as a celebratory feast.
No. Eat when you get to Earth. Someone other than me.
You're very loud. Your life will only last another 4 hours either way. And if I stop releasing the air inside my lungs, you will all suffocate. Your lives are already at their end. Give it up.
No! Narancia yelped, stamping his foot, tears in his eyes. The air in your lungs, that goes in and out of you every time you take a breath. It'll run out fast, won't it?
I do not need to breathe. I'm releasing the air gradually.
But you said 4 hours for the 3 of us.
The 2 of you, and the astronaut. Funnier Valentine died without telling me his plan for re-entry, you see.
I looked around and saw Poochie lying in the corner, still in his spacesuit. There was a round hole in the helmet where Funnier's rear window had fired a bullet, and a bullet hole in the centre of his forehead, but the bullet was stuck in that hole. When I tapped the bullet with my finger, it fell out. It hadn't reached the brain. The holes in his head and helmet were filled with stuffed with red sand, so it was immediately clear who had saved Poochie's life. That forthright Native American. He'd saved our lives too. As I honoured his memory, Poochie ignored me. 36 extra cars, he muttered. He'd been awake and listening this whole time. So with a boom we bounded off the surface of Mars, left the atmosphere for outer space, and Mars was soon vanishing in our wake. Narancia was lying in a heap on the floor, sobbing. Suddenly an electronic jingle next to him went boom, 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 and Narancia bounded up, the Pebble cell phone in his hand. I'd forgotten it even existed. Butcherelli! It's you, right? It is me, Narancia! So much has been going on, I forgot I had this phone! He shouted, excited. Buccialetti said something that clearly infuriated him. Huh? The fuck are you talking about? It's all gone to shit here. We ain't even in Morio anymore. We're on fucking Mars. Mars! planet? Yeah! Huh? Then his face shifted to a sulk and he handed me the phone. Buccialetti wants to talk to you. I took the pebble and put it to my ear. Hello? Where are you and what are you doing? I will not tolerate fooling around. Fooling around? We are on a spaceship about to be eaten by the ultimate thing. I wanted to yell as loud as Narancia, but I restrained myself. We have a large number of Morio citizens hostage. We are treating them well, but we don't mind treating them less well. What the hell is he talking about? You gangsters sure like to talk like gentlemen, I said, but I know you were massacring people on Nara Island, trying to find your boss. The Ninja Moors and I had witnessed it. The islanders trying to get to the harbour, ambushed by those gangsters and slaughtered mercilessly. But Buccialetti answered, Massacre? What massacre? Don't play dumb. Those islanders were trying to escape by boat and you guys killed them. We don't kill civilians. Not officially, anyway. No, we swore an oath not to. Well, you've broken that oath. Wait, where did this massacre happen? On the west side of Nara Island at the harbour. We did a circuit of the island, but there was no harbour. But I'd seen it. I'm not lying. It seems not. I don't smell a lie, as strange as that may be to say on the phone. Someone must be hiding part of that island so it can't be seen from inside. Only one person can do that. Secco Otario and his evil dead. Well done, Jorge Joestar, Buccialetti said. I'll thank you when this is all over. And with that he hung up. He clearly hadn't managed the slightest bit of understanding of the nightmare Narancia and I were in. I handed the phone back to Narancia.
Joestar,
Carl said.
you're a Jojo too?
Oops. Carl grinned at me.
Clearly, there's a lot you have to tell me before I eat you.
Trying not to panic, I prayed this conversation would last more than 4 hours.
But what about me?
Narancia shouted. Good luck? End of chapter 10.